A bit more hybrid, and we're doing some online presentations and in-person interactions with panel discussions. We are also going completely international. We are live streaming across different platforms of YouTube, Twitter, and LinkedIn. We are so international, in fact, that my mother in Australia is watching us. So, hi, Mum. Yeah, probably. So yeah, I'd just like to welcome you all here to this edition. We have an amazing agenda lined up for you today. When I finish, I'll hand over to Dirk. He will give us some opening words before we have a really fascinating keynote speech from Professor John Marie. He's joining us from South Africa, and he'll be online. Then we'll go into Gaetano Casale will update us a little bit on the white paper that we've produced from the working group, but also linking that very nicely to the outcomes from the UN Water Conference. Then we'll run into a panel discussion on some of the similar challenges that we've shared on international water cooperation, specifically related to water. We'll go for a coffee break, and those of you that are still left with us, we'll pass on to the second part of the panel discussion, which potentially could be the most interesting part of the session, where we'll be looking at real practical examples of living lab cases with an international dimension and component to that. Before we launch the working group on LinkedIn, which will be a group for international collaboration and a professional group where we can work together and really start to bring international cooperation across the globe. And then we'll close, and Dirk will give us some final words of wisdom as he has done throughout these days. So without further ado, I'd like to pass over to Dirk to give us some opening words.
Thank you, David. Okay, well, first let me start by thanking the working group Water Beyond Europe, because I think it's really important the work they're doing, and within Water Europe, the working groups are really the operational level in Water Europe, where we bring all our members together to drive a specific, I would say, specific topic, a specific line of activity. And with them, I would say, all the work which is being done in Water Europe, which is generated in Water Europe, specifically also the white paper which the working group is producing now would not be possible. So I would say thank you very much, David and Gaetano, because you're driving also again this working group. So it's very important the work that you're doing. So I would ask a big applause for David and Gaetano. So then a bit about Water Europe also, because as David already said, this is the one session of Water Innovation Europe which is being live streamed across the globe, even to David's mother in Australia. Yeah. So what is Water Europe for the online audience? So Water Europe is the voice and promoter of water-related RTD and innovation in Europe. We were initiated by the European Commission as a European technology platform, really with the mission to promote collaboration, to enhance the performance of the European water sector, but also to strive for international collaboration with regard to the Sustainable Development Goals. And what is very important about Water Europe is that we're not only a multi-stakeholder association really covering the whole value chain of water, but that we're also a purpose-driven organization. I would say even a value-driven organization, which means that all the activities we do are based on our water vision, of which all, I would say, the people present here all received a copy when they entered the building. But for the people online, please go to our website, go to our publications, and the first thing you will find there is our water vision. And in order to drive the implementation of a water vision, we have set up three key activities in Water Europe. We have a collaboration program where we make all the actors along the water value chain collaborate. We have our advocacy program, which has been very important for these 2 days, where we really engage with European decision makers. And beyond that, also global, as we were also strongly present at the UN Water Conference, to really raise the profile of water as an important policy discussion, but also to put in place the drivers for the uptake of innovative solutions. And then we have our implementation program, which is all about bringing solution providers and problem owners together, but also a key instrument that we have developed there, which is really also one of the bases for our international water dialogues, or what we call Water Oriented Living Labs. These are co-creation, collaboration initiatives where we really bring the problem owners, so civil society, industry, governance, and research together in a, I would say, geographically limited, time-limited space to really come up with innovative approaches to facilitate a really systematic way in which we manage and operate water in our society. And we do not only want to do that within Europe, we also want to do that outside Europe and really set up an exchange globally with similar initiatives across the globe, initiatives in Europe, so that we can learn from each other on what are the challenges and how can we best address them. As David already said, this is the second edition of our International Water Dialogues Conference. The first edition was last year.
Together with our stakeholders.
On my paper here some nice
So the
statistics
drinking
of
water companies,
last
water
year, so I'm
boards,
very grateful
the
he left the
technical
paper here.
universities, and
So
we
last
make
year was
sure
a fully
people
digital
working in
version
the sector or people
where we had in
want to work
total
in the water sector, like young
450
people,
participants
that they get
over the duration of
enthusiastic
two
and that
and a
we
half days.
design special
Really people
onboarding,
connecting from New Zealand,
to make
South
them feel
Africa,
welcome in the
Myanmar, Nepal, Rwanda, Bolivia, Brazil, and across the European continent, and I hope we can repeat that today.
quite a lot.
With that, I give the
I
word
would
back to
say,
David.
because
David,
we
thank you
do
very
have
much,
a lot
and
of,
I look forward to the discussions.
Cooperations with Young Waterbeheer. That's Dutch. That's the Young Water
Thank you, Dirk.
Authorities.
Now we'll hand over to
and
Professor
the Dutch,
Jean-Marie Kilishi
National Water
Onyema.
Traineeship.
Jean-Marie,
So,
apart from
are
being
you
an
familiar with the
absolute
Dutch water
legend
traineeship?
and
young
a really
people
good
we encourage
friend of
to
mine,
work in
he's also
we
the
actually
Vice
pay,
President of the International
for
Commission
them
on
to
Water Resources Systems and the
for us,
International
4 days a
Association
week,
of
and one day
Hydrological
they,
Sciences.
we guide
He is
them
the WaterNet
into,
Executive
leadership.
Manager and oversees the
And,
implementation of capacity development activities across 16 SADC countries.
Okay, later.
The list of Jean-Marie's achievements goes on, but the voice of international cooperation within Africa really is Jean-Marie's. So with that, over to you, Jean-Marie, to give us your insights on the UN Water Conference outcomes, how we can participate and improve international cooperation between Europe and Africa, and to get a little bit of your own experience on that. So over to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you for kind words.
Yeah, so I'm Naomi Dimmer.
I don't know if my presentation is up and running. Please confirm for me.
A sister from the National Water Traineeship. We started, or a daughter. We started as within the National Water Traineeship.
David, is my presentation up and running?
Across,
Not yet, no.
Dirk, and we were discussing about the audience in water innovation.
Okay,
and all the other
I'm
activities
sharing
in
already,
Europe
so
and its members, and
okay,
how
let me
they
see.
are active, and what age they have, and what kind of other profiles they have. And we had a discussion about how that community should look like in the ideal world. And the comment was, why don't we have a young, vibrant community that is part of this community, but also
Are we
has
good to go
its
now?
own joint peer.
We are, but we
peer
just don't have your
coaching and
presentation up. So.
There we go. Belonging as well.
All right, it's up,
As what you
Jean-Marie,
did with
all
the
yours.
National Water Traineeship. Why don't we have such a thing on the
Now
European
it's up
level?
and running, I hope.
Because I think what we all are very good at,
Yes, all
if
good.
we are
Go ahead.
working in the water sector, is
Thank you very much, David, and thank you
or anywhere else, but we
for
have no clue about what our neighbors are doing with
inviting me
exactly
to
the same
say a few
regulations.
words
So,
after the UN
that's
Water
how we
Conference,
created the European
for
Drinking Water
which
Programme,
we were
and now also
involved
with
in the
more
preparatory
intergenerational approaches
work,
and,
but
project
also
support for human capital development.
after the whole mass. And
With the
I
help
have
of
a
Water Europe and the National Water
presentation
Traineeship and Wet Skills.
where I just wanted to share a bit of a background to the whole initiative, to get into the gist of the program, to give a bit of some European perspective to this whole issue of water cooperation, or what one can say, what came out of the UN conference, and just share a few reflections with the participant to the dialogue today. I'm sure all of us, we heard this news, but
train my people
for
to
me
say
it was a
then
bit of
thank
a
you, but it's
shock
hard.
to actually realize that the last time that
I mean,
the United Nations had
people
a
say
whole
things, but
dedicated
you
water
like
conference
that. So thanks.
was in
Thanks.
1977, meaning only 46 years ago. All these other years, we've been having conference, but the last time we had a dedicated water conference, it was in 1977 in Rio del Plata in Argentina. So the conference that you had last March was quite an important one. But also to put it into context, the conference was actually looking at the international decade for water action that was running from 2018 up to 2028. And in fact, 2023 was seen as the midpoint year where some kind of evaluation, a midterm evaluation wanted to take place. And the objective of the decade was formulated along three major axes. The first one was to try and advance the sustainable development. The second one, to energize the implementation of some of the existing programs. And the third one was to mobilize action and to achieve the 2030 agenda for sustainable development.
The way we do it is
That
through
said,
different pillars, and one of them is education, which is key.
in
And so
order
we
to
organize
facilitate
different activities,
the
and
into four groups.
unprecedented success.
The first one
with
the
more
intention
than
of
1,000
facilitating access
participants
to knowledge
from all over the
and
world,
exchange of good
78
practices.
countries.
The
to
second
be
work
precise.
stream was
So
to do
this
with
is
the improvement in knowledge generation
virtual online
and
competition,
dissemination.
for students
And then
aged
the third
between
one
13
on
and
communicating
one
the
of
implementation
the
of
four
water-related sustainable development
in regards
goals.
to, as
These
I mentioned,
work
water and
streams
sustainability challenges.
were
So, for example, this year, part
made
of the problem statement was
with a number of activities, and these activities were mainly speaking to water-related sustainable development goals, but they were also aligned to some of the global agreements like your Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, or the 2015 Agreement on Climate Change, or even the Addis Ababa Action Agenda financing for development. So these are the work streams that actually facilitated the action when it came to this decade. So what were we told in New York in terms of results to date? We looked at the Sustainable Development Goals number 6. First of all, I should say that 2023 was not only a midpoint for the water decade, but also the midpoint for the 2030 agenda itself. Because if you look at 2015 and 20, it's literally the midterm. So, talking about the Sustainable Development Goal 6, which is entirely dedicated to water, but we had also the one on Sustainable Development 11.5, which talks about disaster risk reduction, and the link, what was documented, first of all, in terms of Sustainable Development Goal 1 and 2, which is about safe and affordable drinking water. we were told that beside the fact that we have some increase in terms of numbers, we still have about 2 billion and 3.6 billion people without required standard of drinking water and sanitation service, respectively. When you look at Sustainable Development Goal number 3, 6.3, which is about water quality and wastewater treatment plan, we were told that globally, only 44% of households are having wastewater which is not safely treated. But I wanted just to draw attention on some of these figures, especially the one on water quality. The figure that was given to us globally spoke only to 25% of countries worldwide. So the lack of data is a chronic issue that we should keep in the back of our mind when we discuss about all this cooperation. When you look at these other ones, I'm not getting to the details of all of them, but when we look at the Sustainable Development 6.4 on water use efficiency, we can see that people living under war stress nation are still also numerous, with about 733 million living in highly critical water stress nations. And when we look at 6.5, which is about IWRM, in 1992, all countries committed to actually implement IWRM in order to manage water sustainably. But 20 years, or 30 rather, years down the line, only 107 countries, in fact, are not taking any action toward the implementation of IWRM. Similar trend on Sustainable Development 6.6, which is about water and environment, almost 2/3 of wetlands that were part of our ecosystem in the beginning of the century is currently lost, and the rate at which is being lost is quite alarming. And when we look at the Sustainable Development Goal 11.5, which is about disaster risk reduction, and we know how weather-related action affect, we also see that there's an increase in rates of medium to large-scale disaster events. And it is anticipated to go up to about 1.5 per day by the year 2030. So when we look at the figures, we can actually see that we are not moving toward achieving the 2030 agenda. And this was the case even before COVID. And of course, COVID made it worse. Then as part of the UN Water Conference, there are some initiatives that were then identified for action in order to accelerate our attainment of this sustainable goal, especially the water-related ones. 5 of them were identified. The first one, it's about financing. It was felt like when we look at financing, it can actually help countries to accelerate the rhythm at which the Sustainable Goal 6 are actually achieved. And under finance, it's about the magnitude, the governance itself of the finances, the use of financing, but also the target group when it comes to those finances. The other accelerator identified was to do with data and information, the issue of data differentiation and type, the capacity for data acquisition, the data monitoring, even the policy around the issue of data, capacity development. It was once again emphasized that there's a need for stronger capacity if we want to accelerate our achievement toward the Sustainable Development Goals to do with water, to enable also capacity development, new mechanism, partnership was brought up, but also the inclusion to marginalize and also the Global South leadership. Under innovation, some of the elements that I can just pick was to do with the knowledge and data, the technical and physical aspects. Of course, we know that the social innovation was also brought up. And also in terms of governance, the issue of stakeholder engagement in planning and management, the governance implementation, the governance monitoring, but also the global water governance. So you can see that the intention or the ambition of the community or the global community is to try and make sure that we get as close as we can to the Sustainable Development Goal 6 target that we set ourselves to achieve by 2030. So, what can we say came out of the 2030? Of course, it's a bit of a difficult exercise that I was trying to summarize within such a short time, everything that came out. But we can probably say that the intention of building a coalition around water, a bit like what we have for the climate, was kind of birthed. And there are some key elements that were emphasized. First of all, is that we should not just look at the gloom side of the figures, but rather see some of the opportunities. But I think there's a word that came also strongly. It's about inclusiveness, but also action-oriented approach. And using water as one of these connectors, not only to Sustainable Development Goal number 6, but to all the other Sustainable Development Goals. Of course, all this is nice and very informative, but I felt like, yes, we had a big mass out there speaking to water issues, but what are the practical examples in terms of international water cooperation that were part of this process and that are actually going to take place, you know, to give that practical side to this approach in terms of international water cooperation. And for that, I decided to share with you this afternoon 2 specific examples. The first example is the International Association Hydrological Sciences Decade. I'm sure some of you are familiar that each and every 10 years, people working in the space of water and hydrologists would come together and try to solve a specific issue. So in line with the UN Water Conference, IHS realized that science for science was no longer going to work. So we came up then with this approach from science for solution. And you can see the acronym, it says HELPING.
fantastic.
and helping stand for hydrology, engaging local people in a global world. Because what came out clearly was that action are taking place at local level. As much as we can have a global initiative like the Water Action Agenda that came out of New York, action are taking place locally. So whatever we do, as much as the leadership can come from global, action are actually supposed to take place at the local level. And how do we also frame that? We're framing it in a way that there's a need for it to be owned, to have the participation of all parties as much as you can. As you can see, the approach that, for instance, IHS took here, starting from collecting input from across the globe, streamlining it, contextualizing, developing it into a vision, developing, framing into a strategy. Then in the coming days, we are going to define and articulate more action so that it can then be implemented. But also one element that came out is the fact that under implementation, communication, and that loop where we relook at what is being done is important. And maybe to get close to bringing this talk to a close, I had an opportunity yesterday afternoon to have a conversation with the rector of IHE, the water education in the Netherlands, and I just threw to him a question and say, what do you think? Because we were together with him in New York. And from our discussion, I said, what do you think Europe should consider going forward after New York? One of the elements that we discussed and that also that I'll share with you this afternoon is the partnership. He said, beyond all sciences that we are doing, beyond all the effort, there is that dimension of co-creation, which is under partnership. There is that approach of empathetic leadership, which speaks also to the partnership. And it has to be purpose-driven if we really want to make a difference on the grounds. And my, I think, almost last slide is also to speak to this issue of partnership. Here, I wanted also just to say that when it comes to international water cooperation, whether you are sitting from the south, like me here in South Africa, but coming from Congo, or you sit in Europe, I think one size does not fit all. And here, I want, since we are talking to the European colleagues and platforms, I want to acknowledge some of the efforts that are coming from the European Union and the European Commission. The last time with Water Europe, I mentioned the research projects like the framework program, the Horizon 2020. But in addition to that, there are more efforts like the mobility effort that the European Commission is putting in place that is allowing us to have the South-South relationship, but also the South-North relationship. The other example is the support through the European Union that is channeled to government. You can see there, for instance, we are busy implementing a project on integrated catchment management, building the capacity in Lesotho with funding from the European Commission, but channeled through the German corporation and implemented through a various model. But you can also see that you've got other players like your global environmental facility with whom we are working. We have government like the government of the Netherlands that is championing water issues. So I think when it comes to cooperation, we have several models and approaches, but I think at the end of the day, if we are driven by some purpose, we can make a difference. And allow me just maybe to take this opportunity also to invite those who will be able to join us this October in Zanzibar, because we would have our 24th symposium where researchers, policymakers, and practitioners will come and talk about water. And our team is accelerating change by fostering innovation and integration for sustainable resources management. More can be found on our website. I also have a calendar here. Of course, as part of IHS, early July will be in Berlin for the IUGD General Assembly. So we are also hoping that some among the participants will also be able to join us. Let me bring this to an end and extend my appreciation to Water Europe for putting this together, to David and WNB team, but also to Gaetano with the IHE DARF team for affording me the opportunity to say a few words after the UN Water Conference. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Jean-Marie. Some fantastic insights there, and some really interesting initiatives that you've shared with us. And I'm really happy that you've also focused a lot of your talk on the SDGs, and I think some of that focus that you mentioned around partnerships, etc., is exactly where we've been working in this working group on Water Beyond Europe. And so that leads very nicely into Gaetano's talk. He's going to talk to us a little bit about our white paper that is focused on SDG 17. So that builds nicely on this idea of partnerships. And he'll also give us a little bit of his own insights and build on some of the aspects that Jean-Marie has mentioned. So Gaetano Casale from IHE Delft as liaison officer and co-lead to the Water Beyond Europe working group, to take the stage. Thank you, Gaetano.
I'd like to use one of these, if it's possible. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you very much. First of all, David, of course, but also Jean-Marie, because everything that he mentioned fits very much with the story I'm going to tell you. I'm going to talk to you about this white paper about international cooperation. So if you don't have a copy, please take advantage. There are also some left outside. Next slide, please. It's this paper here, and I would like first of all to mention as a disclaimer that I'm only the editor of this nice piece of paper. So what you see here is a special acknowledgement to actually the ones that contributed to the content of this white paper. I'm a little bit of a perfectionist, so I was not sure at any moment that this was a perfect piece of paper until a few minutes ago, where I met one of my colleagues in the UN Water team, who told me, "This is yours, you did this is perfect. We have to share the news also in the other network, including the UN Water and any other platform." So I'm now 100% convinced that we did a great job. Please, next slide. Taking a little bit the baton from Jean-Marie, I also would like to mention something about UN Water Conference and some of my observations there that are very relevant to the work we have done in this
having a female on top
white
is
paper.
not having a female on top, you know? And like,
My observation, of course,
That's
this
not the
was
point. It's
a
about
massive
what
event,
people say
more than
and what
7,000
people do
people,
and how they
a
create
huge
impact.
number of
It's
side
not-
events,
it's not because
interactive
of
water
the
dialogue,
token, it's there.
you name it.
And
But
that
the
young
few
persons only
ones that
should
I
talk
was able
about
to
being
attend
young
had a
in the
common
section.
denominator,
That's not the
which
point.
is summarized in
So
some
they
of the
should be
statements
invited
that
to
you
talk
see here.
about
First of all,
nature-based
the one
solutions,
from
if
the
that's your topic. They should
President of
be
the General
able to talk
Assembly.
about
You
their
can see that
expertise,
one of the
and their
key messages
experiences.
is that
So, yeah.
we have to have improved and inclusive cooperation.
Yeah, if I
And
may
this
add
is
as
just
well,
an excerpt from many
I think
other
that,
messages that
also Exilum,
across
I
the board
feel
mention that improved
what,
cooperation needs to be put in place.
matters, right?
And of
is
course,
the
we
fact
have
that
been
even young
cooperating,
people
and this
have the
Water Europe
possibility
is
to
one of
gain
the
exposure,
good
and
examples.
you are recognized
Always,
for
right?
your results.
But still,
right? So
everyone
it's not
perceives
that,
effective
okay,
international cooperation
you're
is
a
still
young person,
not
so
in
your
place.
work
So there
is
is
like,
work to be done there,
yeah,
and
you're
I
an
think
intern,
that
so
with
okay,
this
we don't
white
expect
paper
much
and
from you.
the rest
Like,
of the work we are going
you're
to do,
given
we
a
can
task, you're
contribute to
given
that.
a responsibility,
Next,
and
please.
if the outcome is good, is good.
Like
So
you
I
have
think,
seen this picture also in a
it's
couple of
also,
sessions in the days
change of
before.
mentality
This is
of,
taken
and giving parity and
this was
consideration
made for the Stockholm
irrespective
Resilience
of
Center.
the age
It's a
or
nice representation
gender.
of what
Because,
Jean-Marie was
you know, it's
explaining,
becoming
the
a trend, and I
architecture
feel it's a
of
bit
the
like
Sustainable
marketing.
Development
Oh
Goals
yeah,
and
let's
Agenda
have more
2030.
female engineers.
And what we normally,
I see
when I
HR
say
people
we,
doing
is the
like that.
Water
I mean,
Club, the Water
it's not
Family,
that
what we
you are
normally
supposed to recruit
focus on
young
is the
people
bottom part
or
of it.
females just
So
because
we
you
mentioned
need to
the
keep the balance.
SDG 6,
It's
of
because
course, but also
these
the
people
water-related
are
SDG,
valuable,
SDG 2
right?
on food, and the one on energy and the connection thereof.
You
Can
were
I ask
participating in
how
the
many of
bootcamp,
you
and
are
we had a long
familiar with the
discussion about
content of
inclusion and what it
SDG
really
17?
means,
Please raise your
and
hand.
about the pain that needs to be felt by the rest as well, because probably
Well,
when
I think
you
that
bring in something
it's not by
new,
chance that
then people
SDG
are,
17
bringing new
is mentioned at the
initiatives and
top
new
of this
diversity
picture
and new
because
ideas, and then you do, and
we
it's
all
like in your head,
recognize
oh,
the importance of international cooperation, but the
yeah,
problem with
because then
that
they
is
feel the
that,
pain. So we need
as
to
I
find a
mentioned
way
here
to,
and
to
in
go
the white
through that
paper
pain
by my
altogether.
colleagues,
Um,
often as a
be really
standalone
inclusive
element
like that.
and not as just a means to an end. As a standalone element, international cooperation is considered, it's taken for granted. We all assume that in projects we cooperate in anything. It's encouraged, of course, but rarely specifically addressed. So that's what we claim in this paper, that international cooperation as a standalone element should get more attention. Next one, please. This picture is a recent picture of the Netherlands. So I have a lot of Dutch colleagues in the audience. So that's something that you would not expect from an, in principle, very wet country. But what I mean to say here is that the challenges that we're facing, we have heard this during the past days a lot, are becoming more and more unpredictable. I've been in contact with some of the colleagues at the Ministry of Infrastructure in the Netherlands, and when they speak to us as an academic center at HE Delft, they said, you have to help us because we are not prepared for this kind of challenges. So the low flows in the river Rhines and the droughts, this is something that the Dutch have never experienced. So they are really looking forward to learn from countries that have been experiencing this kind of issues for a long time. And so the unprecedented level of mutual learning requires a structural increase of cooperation, but also sometimes in the case of standalone projects, you have that you have an objective and the 3-year project related to a specific topic, but the learning that you have there needs to be much more adaptive than in the past, because things change very rapidly. So adaptive learning and therefore the way you cooperate to address that needs to be addressed as well. Next one, please. When I look at this picture, the first thing that comes to me is that you see, in my opinion, a common sense of purpose among these kids. So what you have to, when you talk about international cooperation and the things that are mentioned also there, like the quintuple helix, I hope that my colleague Richard is happy to see that, that word there. So the cooperation about the public, the academia, the private, you have heard this very often. It's very important, but it needs to be based on a common sense of purpose, and another word that we use in our white paper, on trust. We have been discussing the Water Smart Society implies that you have to have a digital water world, etc. But before the digital, you have to be able to access the data. And especially in international context, accessing data is not so much, and especially at an international context, it's not a given. And sharing data is also a matter of trust, and that you have a common sense of purpose, and that you can share the data before you digitally treat this data. And this participation of all these different actors need to go a little bit beyond the networks like this. They also need to engage with local communities, for example. I have my colleague Nora, who is an expert in that. You will hear this later in the panel. And also the diversity is very important. We have some young people in the audience, so I'm very glad about that. But of course, you also have to include the retired people maybe, because they have a lot of experience, and indigenous knowledge. That's one of the agenda that we have, for example, in my institute, and especially at the international level. Indigenous knowledge is a good complementing way of addressing knowledge, in addition to maybe new technologies and new knowledge. Next one, please. I'm not going to enter the details of all these matters. You will find all the details in the white paper. But of course, financing is always an interesting topic to address, also for international cooperation. And as I mentioned in the beginning, I think actually we claim in this white paper that there should be mechanism of financing that specifically addressed improved cooperation. So not just as a means to an end. No, you are not supposed to finance only the end, but also the means that will help you to achieve the end. Among all these different aspects that are highlighted in the white paper, I think this one we were discussing just now in the over lunch, the complementarity of the different funding mechanisms, because in my opinion, research and innovation, which is the main topic of this network, education and capacity development, which sometimes you also hear from some of our experts, are three sides of the same coin. Three sides of the, sorry, maybe I'm expecting too much from one coin, but so three sides of the same three-sided coin. And what you see is that the complementarity is very important, because you ask someone from a specific section of the Commission, they will only program and fund based on education, and someone else only on research. So this is something that maybe we can all agree that a better integration of these different programs would be beneficial. Next slide, please. I only have 1 minute, my boss is saying. So I'm not going to mention all of this, but these are the key messages that we have in our white paper on the issue of, or on the opportunity of international cooperation. Among them, you can also see the Living Labs. So Living Labs are discussed, as you know, in Water Europe as one of the main tools of getting knowledge to actually address problems on the ground. And it's already, in my opinion, a challenge, but it's even more of a challenge in an international context. But you will hear more about this story in one of the next panels. And one of the things that I would like to mention to conclude, David is already standing up, next slide, is also one of the outcome of the water conference. Just to conclude that we are at IHE Delft with a number of partners actually working on one of the identified game changers from the General Assembly. This is the game changer number 6, if I'm not wrong. a global water education network. So there are a lot of networks, but still you find in 2023 someone who is suggesting that you have another network because probably the existing ones are not enough or not working effectively. So this is a very important action that we're taking up. If you're interested to know more, please reach out. And again, thanks for your attention. Next slide. Thank you. And reach out, mail me, write to me, and we can take the discussion further. Thanks, David. Over to you. Thanks.
Thank you very much. You want to stay again? Yeah, thank you very much, Gaetano. In fact, I'm going to ask you to stay here on stage and keep the microphone in hand. I personally want to see that three-sided Italian coin. Never trust an Italian, they say. Stay here, please, because now we run into a panel discussion. Take your seat, and I'd like to obviously invite up Murray, Richard, and Valentina to join Gaetano on stage as we run into the panel discussion on water and international cooperation related challenges we share. So over to you, Gaetano.
Thank you, David. Again, me. I think that I'm really glad and proud of introducing you the first panel of this session. There is a change of plans with respect to the official plans. I will explain that in a minute. So we have a last-minute change. But first and foremost, I would like to mention that I'm quite glad we were able to have the people we have in this panel because they will address the opportunity of international cooperation from quite different perspectives. So we have the perspective of the capacity development, how to be effectively cooperating on capacity development. The other one is on research and innovation, as well as effectively cooperating in the UN context. And online, we will have the perspective of effectively cooperating in a transboundary context, especially addressing the issue of water, peace, and security. So we have, sorry, my glasses. I will introduce you the panelists. First of all, Richard Ellerman, who is currently the head of politics at Eurecat in Barcelona, co-leader of Renaissance program within the European Commission, had just completed an 8-month assignment at the UN World Water Quality Alliance in Nairobi. He is a political analyst who in recent years specialized also in environmental and scientific policy and the links between politics, the world of research and development, and citizen engagement. So that's a lot to say. Thanks, Richard, for being here. Then we have Murray Biedler, who has a background in geography and in hydrogeology and international politics. He's coordinated and implementing policy research and scientific research, and currently is heading the EU Water Facility within DG INTPA, and former coordinating the African Centers of Excellence. And then online, I hope she's there, Susanne Schmeyer, the head of the Water Governance Department and Associate Professor of Water Law and Diplomacy at IHE Delft. Research, teaching, and advisory activities focus on the legal and institutional dimensions of water resources governance at both the subnational and transboundary levels. So, of course, that's a short summary. I would like to welcome on stage the panelists. And also, I would like to mention that despite the previous program, I'm not going to be the moderator of the session, but I would like to inform you that my colleague Valentina Jaramillo, that kindly accepted to be the moderator, so she's going to be given the mic right now. Valentina, thank you.
Well, thank you, Gaetano, and hi, everyone. So before we start this conversation, I would like to say that I love listening to people who are passionate about what they're saying, but I'm pretty sure we have to be concise with our answers, because I have the feeling they're going to be staring at me a lot in this conversation. So I just want to start by asking, we are now like having this international cooperation, so we know how people from different sectors, what's their perception about water. But I would like to know from our panelists, what is the first memory you have about water?
Mon Dieu. Thank you very much for that. I have a long memory. I think the first remarkable memory I have of water, and it's a long memory, between 2.5 and 3 years old. I was a young boy in the backyard of the family house in a city in Canada called Saskatoon. And I heard a noise and I turned around and I looked up at the fence, and the boy next door leaned over and shot me in the face with a water pistol, and I cried.
Okay, thank you. And Richard?
My first water memory is, it's not a memory because it's something which I still do every day, and that was sitting in the bath and playing with my rubber duck.
Well, I'm pretty sure a lot of people here have the same feeling. I don't know if Susan is... Oh, yeah, there she is. Can you share with us what's your first memory about water?
Hi, good morning everyone from the US. My, maybe not the first, but maybe the most impressive memory is when my dad, when I was a child, always took me out to creeks, little rivers, and we were building dams, stopping the water from flowing, and building little turbines made from wooden sticks. That's my first memory that kind of reflects nicely what I'm doing now.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And now we have the first question for our panelists. And in your opinion, what are the core elements to make international cooperation on water work? Richard?
So, I mean, we've been hearing over the last few days and the last few years and the last few decades basically the same key words. So I won't go into detail with them. I mean, obviously, first of all, it's necessary to collect data, but it's even more necessary to convert that data into action. Then, at the same time, there's a need, as we've all been saying, that there's a need for water to be recognized as part of the WEFE plus H nexus, so the nexus between water, energy, food, ecosystems, and public health. Then there's the question of what is erroneously being called the quintuple helix, because that is now actually a sextuple helix. But we won't call it the sextuple helix because it's becoming very complicated to say. So we will call it the social political helix. And that's really the bringing together at a local level, and this is very important, at a local level, the public sector, the private sector, the research sector, the cultural sector, to create the emotional stimuli to be able to involve people, citizens themselves, but also a factor which nobody is talking about, the private landowner, because it's the private landowner who basically are controlling the land through which most of the water in Europe runs through, to the extent where it's probably about 92% of the land is owned by 5% of the population. We need to involve them. We may not like them, we may not agree with their ownership of their land, but we need to face the reality. Then, obviously, local engagement. Yes, citizen engagement, which leads to effective citizen science and vice versa. The capacity at an international collaboration to use the local communities as the catalysts for science, art, sustainability, diplomacy across regions and also across national boundaries. And then finally as well, the capacity to develop a strong emergency reaction. And that also depends as well on strong capacity development. Now then, very, very quickly, because I have been warned about it, I talk too much and I've been told, Richard, keep it short, so I will do. So I just want to identify the problems. And the problems are very simple. First of all, the United Nations. Everyone's talking about the United Nations 2023 conference, and everyone on LinkedIn has been going on saying, hey, look, I was there. I wasn't there, actually. I was actually in Nairobi at the time. But that was a great photo opportunity for a lot of people. And yes, as we've been told, over 800 pledges have been made. Yeah, and so what? 800 pledges doesn't mean anything. They're just pledges, they're just promises, they're just empty words. What you need if you want the United Nations to work is to have a resolution. For a resolution to happen, there will be next month. In July, there will be the SDG 6 meeting of the United Nations. Then afterwards, we will be having the meetings within preparatory for the General Assembly. then we will be going to UNEA in February of 2024. And maybe, just maybe, apart from the naming of a special water envoy of the United Nations, who will undoubtedly be a woman who's already been decided, maybe you might just get one UN resolution, because UN agencies do not work without UN resolutions, because that has to be financed by member states. That's the next thing, is that it's member states who have to finance actions. And we have to understand that as the water sector at a global area. So we have to convince member states, and the only way we can do that is through local action, influencing and seeping upwards to the subnational level and then up to the national level itself. Another problem we have, somebody now mentioned the question of the water family. Water is not a family, it's a very dysfunctional family. It's a very diverse family. In fact, it's a family that hate each other's guts. It's a sort of family that if they came together at Christmas, they would be throwing the Christmas pudding at each other after 10 minutes. There are too many organizations duplicating the actions of too many other organizations. I can guarantee you that in this moment, there are probably at least 5 other events going on in the world where they're saying exactly the same thing about their own organizations as we've been saying these last 2 or 3 days. It is time that we bring all of these organizations together. And through my experience at the United Nations, I was giving a press conference in Nairobi with regards to an action that we were doing on behalf of UNEP. I was then followed by a colleague from UNESCO and then a colleague from UNICEF, and we discovered that we were doing exactly the same actions. And those are 3 agencies within 20 meters of each other in the UN complex in Nairobi. So there's too much duplication. There are too many people protecting their own territory and thinking that they've got the right to undertake activities which we should all be undertaking together. And then very, very quickly, the last problem is that at the United Nations, for me, it was very easy to find 5 million euros, but it was impossible for me to find 500 euros to finance the 600 local water forums that we have around the world. Local forums are basically the use of the sextuple helix at a local community level. But to finance them, and they need very, very little money. They need very, very little money. But I could not get the money to them because the bureaucratic process, both from national governments and from supranational institutions, don't permit it. I could have got 3, 4, 5, or 6 million euros to that country, but that would go straight into the coffers of the state. So I think that that's something is also that we need to address.
Well, thank you for that, for giving your thoughts. And now we would like to hear from a different perspective, the same question for you. So what do you think are the core elements for international cooperation?
Right, thank you very much. Having left my notes on the table back home, could we just bring up the slide that was on the opening, please? So while we're waiting for that, I mean, I will address from the perspective of human capacity development. I'll focus what I think is probably the human component of that triumvirate, and which will identify, I'm getting dizzy. Oh, that's it. Okay, very good. I will identify elements of major challenges, a particularly large challenge in human capacity development, and a couple of aspects which we saw worked successfully. And that'll be based on the ACE Water 2 Human Capacity Development Program, which I coordinated up until 2021, when I was at the time with UNESCO IHP, and that was funded by the European Commission. So next slide, please. Now, the implementers of this project of human capacity development are the African Union Development Agency, NEPAD, Water Centers of Excellence. Now, they were created under a call of interest, but also a pre-qualification around 2007, 2008 by the African Union to identify in a number of candidate countries in the continent of Africa, universities and research institutions who wanted to present themselves as water centers of excellence in the work that they do, to also take part in the implementation officially of water-related mandates of the African Union. Consequently, at the moment, we have 16, 17 countries in Africa, in West Africa, Southern Africa, East Africa, 21 or 22 water centers of excellence. And what they were mandated to do, following a declaration from the African Ministers' Council on Water, it's in the bottom of that little slide, implement a human capacity development program for young professionals and technical level capacity for challenges in the water sector. Okay, so, and that was to then, as you can see, the one image on the bottom was to look at human capacity, skills, etc. Next slide, please. Now, the rationale behind this follows on an IWA study, which came out just before 2010, called Mind the Gap, where the IWA studied a number of countries in Africa and in Asia, where they tried to evaluate what were the gaps, the human capacity gaps in the water sector in these countries. I think they did maybe initially in the first phase 3 or 4 in Africa and similar in Asia. So they asked 2 main questions, what are the skills gaps that are missing, what's missing, and how many? And they came to a very concrete answer to both of those questions. We don't know. So consequently, we decided to pursue their recommendations in ACE Water 2, which was to do a sector-wide assessment, what I mentioned, up and down, which is vertical, horizontal. So not just ask some key actors in the sector, what is the problem, what is the gaps in the water sector? Because it was very well explained that when you ask someone what is the problem, they will not tell you what the problem is. They will tell you what their problem is. So consequently, we reached out from minister all the way down to local authority and horizontal users of service providers, beneficiaries, end users, technical, and also other alternative service support, such as finance and business management. So on that, on a consultation, we received a large list of gaps across a panoply of different types of skills. And we brought all of the people together, and we presented all of the results, and they said, look, this is the list here. And it was a long list, it was a Christmas list. And we said, fine, does everybody understand this? And after a long conversation over a couple of days, everybody acknowledged that, in fact, all of these gaps, which they weren't aware of, a number of them, were valid and they existed. We said, fine, we will address them in the ACE Water 2 project. And we want you to select the top 5, which is what they did. And from there on that consensus, we moved ahead to develop some skills and training programs inside the university curricula and programming in these 16 countries. Now, we got blocked at the time by COVID. We lost half of the opportunity to move ahead. Other universities, the other half, were able to move ahead, and we moved online, and we did identify these skills and gaps, and we moved ahead. So we ended up with some very interesting results. The sustainability on that, 2 components is, one, these are not just a project training, which when the project is over, then everybody goes home, the training is finished. No, this is part of university curriculum and training modules. That's 1. 2, the centers of excellence are part of the African Union. They're there, and they will continue to be there, for as long as the African Union is there. So that maintains itself quite well. The other part is in terms of support, financial and institutional support, because the centers of excellence are part of NIPAD, which is part of the African Union, they are regarded as part of the African Union. So they regularly participate in political planning and research discussions with the African Union, with the regional economic commissions, with organizations like WaterNet, which Jean-Marie mentioned. They're at the annual meetings every year, and also with the European Union. Next slide, please. Okay. So that's an example of sustainability. One is doing just a much better capture of the problem as opposed to the typical linear approach of, this is the problem as I see it, these are the people I want to do it, we want to know what they think, and then we'll implement it. Fair enough. The support from the individual countries, the governments in each country, is such that they were so surprised and so impressed by the sector-wide assessments, they want this repeated every 5 years. And the last element of sustainability is that right now we are working on ACE Water 3. So this has been going on since 2009, and it's going to continue for a minimum another 5 years. Thank you.
Thank you for that really nice overview. And now I would like to talk to Susanne online, and I have the same question for you. What do you think are the core elements for international cooperation on water to work, and how do you think we can use these to actually overcome the forthcoming global challenges, such as climate migration?
Thanks. I'm going to focus on maybe a specific element, because I think a lot of things have been mentioned already. The two previous speakers have talked quite a bit about what I would call the technical elements of making international cooperation work, right? We need the right processes, we need the technical capacity in people, but also in organizations. We obviously need the financial resources, which are often lacking. But I would say that in addition to that, there's also a political dimension that I think we're often forgetting about, or that maybe we don't want to talk about because it is so difficult to address. And this is questions around trust, around commitment of actors, but it's also questions of acknowledging or seeing in the first place the benefits of cooperation. And in the world that we live in today, where we do see increasing unilateralism, where we do see increasing thinking in countries that focuses on their immediate unilateral benefits instead of sort of the broader, more long-term cooperative outcomes, I think that's important to address. So it's about highlighting, measuring, valuing the benefits that individual people, but especially also countries, can get out of cooperation. And there's quite some work that has been done in terms of capturing benefits, for example, benefits of cooperating over water, but then really translating this into policy decisions, I think, is something that's still lacking. So for me, in addition to what has been said before, which I absolutely agree with, I think to make international cooperation work over water, but also more generally, we somehow have to be able to capture the value of cooperation more, and especially convince those, if we talk about water outside of the water sector, that it is useful. Because so many decisions about water, water in general, but also cooperation over water, are being made by decision makers that are not in the water sector, right? Think about ministries of finance, for example, that decide about making money available for basin organizations, for example, through which riparian countries cooperate. So as long as we're not able to convince these people, these decision makers, these sectors of the value of cooperation, I think we'll be stuck. And obviously, you mentioned climate migration. There are obviously also other problems way beyond the water sector. We also won't be able to address those if we don't acknowledge that cooperation in the long run is more beneficial than unilateral action. And I think this really applies also to all governance levels. It's something that needs to be addressed at the global level. One of the previous speakers mentioned the issue of the UN, the dysfunctional UN water family. So obviously there is a need to acknowledge how cooperation, better coordination between the different actors would be beneficial. But the same also applies to the basin level, for example, where countries cooperate or don't cooperate because they might not see the benefits over a shared river, but obviously also to the national level, where different ministries need to cooperate all the way down to the local level. So I'll leave it at that, but that would be my main point, complementing what has been said before.
Okay, thank you very much, Susanne. I would like to have an open question either for our panelists or people in the public. And it's related to young professionals. I am glad to be sitting here, and I was able to attend the UN Water Conference and have a different experience. But my question is, we're talking about cooperation, and cooperation also comes between professionals who are working either in the water sector or other sectors to overcome these challenges. So what advice would you have to young professionals to actually move into this international cooperation on water?
My advice would be, first of all, don't think about what's in it for me.
healing place to work.
I've been involved in the European Junior Water Program as an ambassador,
trying to foster
exchanges. I've given them a couple of master classes, and I've asked them, why have you got involved with water? Why have you got involved in the water sector?
Directly working on
and the answers have ranged from because it's an interesting career, because of the salaries, because of opportunities to travel, etc.
So I would say awareness and attractiveness.
I am really fed up with young professionals, middle-aged professionals, and old professionals worrying about their salaries, but forgetting about the fact of what they have the opportunity to do. I don't want professionals. I want activists. It's a problem that I saw in the UN. It's a problem which I see in the European Union. It's a problem which I see in the private sector, and it's a problem which I see at the municipal level amongst technicians. We need activists. If you want a high salary, fine,
people talk a lot about impact.
I hope you earn it, but don't go into water just because it's a good professional
outlet. You've been a project lead. Well, look at this bridge I built. That's great. If you're working in public
policy,
thank you.
I think I would echo some of that definitely as well.
So the way I think about it,
the aspect of young professionals, it's related to
energy,
partly to where you are and what the needs are, and that I think echoes what my colleague has just said. You know, what's the need? And coming back to the project I was involved with, the declaration of AMCAL, that was hard on the heels of statistics, which stated that because of a variety of public health issues and security issues, the population, the majority of the population in the continent of Africa
not in terms of,
was 30 years and under.
Look what I've been able to change,
that's
but rather
a huge
feeling that you're on the right side of history. There is a need.
When I collaborate with so-called young professionals, young educated master's students and graduate students, and even technicians and vocational experts at young age in Africa, I have a different response from them. It's very, very much need-driven, and they're much more idealistic. So I think, there's a need for a connection from the young professional community coming out of, say, the West or the North, with Europe and North America, and to bring them much more into contact with our colleagues in sort of the global, developing South, as it were. And I think, there's a room for shared activism there, and that's definitely worth promoting.
Well, thank you very much. I agree with you on the connection part. I feel like international cooperation is also about being connected and learning how to talk. And then young generations we are known for being well connected, so why not take that as an advantage and start using it in a sector that actually needs it right now? Suzanne, do you have anything to say on this matter?
Yeah, maybe more on a personal level, which traits help to make it, to survive, to contribute to water cooperation. I'd see be patient, be persistent, and be positive. Patient because things move slowly, much more slowly than we all hope for. Persistent to stick around, and in spite of maybe disappointed hopes and things moving slowly, still sort of contributing, but also being positive. That's something that I found particularly difficult to learn, to be honest, to see how slowly things are moving. And we've heard on this panel already all the things that are wrong and why the UN Water Conference was maybe not as positive and why there was no resolution and so on. But in order not to have that pull you down and make you frustrated, I think being positive is really a key element. So yeah, persistence, patience, and positive thinking.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I will leave the room now if the people who are sitting in front of us want to say anything to our panelists, ask a question, say your thoughts. This is the right time for doing that. So I encourage you to take the mic.
Yes, I'm Cristian Carboni, Industria De Nora. I have a question for you, in particular, Richard. I fully agree with European Commission, UN need to give a framework, no? But we need to act, in particular to a local level, no? in your opinion, because also in this day, we are talking about policy, about regulation, made by European Commission, DG Environment, made by ministry, country, But in your opinion, it is possible to make action at a very small level. Your opinion, and also I can open a question to the other speaker, to act at a very small level. For example, we need to save water, Yesterday I put the example, in Italy we put a lot of billion euros in saving energy in the house, but not €0 to saving water, If we are in water crisis in Italy, Why don't an utility make the policy using price, for penalization, high consuming, taking in mind the number of people, blah, 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 and give this part of the money for improving solution, because if with solar panel, working this way, you pay energy more, but I give part of the money to put solar panel, because the family had not money to put improvement, It is possible that a small municipality, a small utility can start from this small action, or in your opinion is too much small for do something? Because in this way population can push, because we are make awareness in very local level. It's more simple to do some activity. It is only a drop and do nothing, or with a lot of drop we can do a more faster than not waiting government, UN, European nation, UN, and so on.
You have a drop, a small drop. If you have enough of them, then you have a small stream. If you have a number of streams, then you have a river. If then you have a river, you go into lakes. And if you go into lakes, and then you go onto rivers, you go into oceans. So no, I think you're not going small enough. I've heard a lot of people talking about we need to approach local municipal governments. No, the majority of our local water forums, which is basically the creation of what has been discussed a lot this week about citizen engagement, they're not created by local municipal governments. They're created by citizens who are suffering that problem in that moment. And I think that, for example, in Europe, what you're suggesting would function. It wouldn't function, for example, in my recent experience in Africa, in Somalia, or, for example, in Kenya. And I want to give you, it's not a nice example, but I hope that at least it will make you remember something, which is, for example, in Nairobi, there are a number of slum areas such as Korogosho or Kibera, which is the second largest slum in the world, and they have running through there the river Nairobi. And there are a number of local, young, and this is very important actually, it's always young people who are leading them. So in fact, I don't actually believe in talking about youth. I like to think that what we should do is just permit the youth to become the leaders of the social movement full stop, which very often they do, especially in countries such as Africa, especially in continents such as Africa. But what I wanted to say, and it's not a nice example, and I apologize, but I think it's important, is that, for example, in Korogosho, there's a small organization called Coombe Green that was formed literally by former gang members who were fed up of going to prison because they'd already been murdering people when they were 12 or 13. And so they started to decide, look, I don't want to go back to prison, so let's start cleaning up the river Nairobi and give ourselves another purpose. And as they did that, they came across another problem. And the problem is that they were constantly picking out half alive or dead babies
or an insult,
from both the river and the riverbank. And the reason why is because abortion is illegal in Kenya, but at the same time, 70% of the women in Korogosho and Kibera are raped systematically. Now then, as a result of that, what was a water issue has now become, and we have now looked at it together with UNICEF and with UN Women, and that has now become a national issue, which is about water quality. It's about how they were cleaning the river, but how they've also discovered other social problems. And I think that what I'm trying to use from that example is that that came from 3 ex-criminals.
Include them at every stage.
And it seeped upwards. And this is what I was saying before. very small
make
local
these
actions
spaces
identifying
accessible
very
and
specific
drop the
problems
jargon.
can
I
then
mean, for
become
people
municipal
who
actions,
are
which
outside
then,
of, but
when you
but
have
sort of
enough
on the periphery
municipalities,
of
become
the professional
sub-national,
community.
then national, and
Of
then
course, jargon exists for a
supranational
reason
issues.
because we have our own kind of language.
I apologize
games
for the
and
example because
we
it's
need to
not
be able to
tasteful,
use
but
shorthand
that's the
like
reality
NBS,
that we are facing,
right? But
and that's the
I wouldn't
reality
know
of
what
water
NBS
quality
was when I was
in
a young graduate, sort of
vast
trying
numbers
to
of
figure out my
cities
way
and
in the
areas around the world.
sustainability world. You know, these kind of acronyms, the jargon that we
Right,
use.
thanks.
Is often
I'd like to build
a
on
barrier to
that,
entry.
and I agree
And I
totally
think that
with
if
the
we want
youth.
to involve young
The
people
one
who
point
are
I
not
didn't make in
already
my youth
fully committed
presentation
and
is
have
that
studied
I
environmental
think
engineering
not
and want to
just
work in,
educating,
kind of
preparing
water
young
governance,
water professionals
then
and
we have
youth,
to make the space,
to take the stage,
we
which I
alluded to
agree
earlier, more
totally.
attractive.
They
That
should be
means
there.
making it more accessible,
We need to
dropping the
also
jargon.
educate old water
I
professionals.
want to add a nuance
because
here,
they
which
are
I think is
they don't
important.
even see what's in front of them
We
sometimes,
shouldn't,
and
or
we
we
need to
ought to be
open their
careful
eyes.
not to push
Coming
young
back to
people
your
out
you
of
mentioned
their
on the
depth.
initiative,
I
I
think
think
we in
from
this room
what
who
my
I
colleagues
assume
just
are all on
described
board with the
as
idea of more
a
inclusive young
as a
people
social
in
response with
governance
youth
and
and
management,
criminal
I
activities,
don't
and
see a
I've
whole
seen
lot of
this also
dissent.
in different
Sitting
cities
here
on
for a
the
reason.
continent.
But that can also
The example of
I've
a small
been in
contribution
rooms at
from a large
conferences
number of
where
people.
a young person,
One good example of
because the
that, this is from the
organisers
civil
with the best
society
will in the
corner,
world want to
would be
include a young
Water Aid
person
in
on
the UK.
stage,
They've been
and
doing
they've
that
given
for
somebody who's
years,
not
and
quite
they're very
professionally equipped to
successful,
do the job that
well-funded
they've been asked to
organization.
do,
But
a
that's the
mandate to
underpinning
go and do
philosophy
something
and
that's been a
management
little bit
structure, or the
uncomfortable,
management
and it's
strategy that they're
backfired.
working
And
with.
the grumpy
On the
old
other
git,
side,
proverbial
promoted
grumpy old
by
git,
the
right?
French
So
Water
the-
Partnership,
you know,
the French government.
Imagine,
was
imagine
similar.
Neil's alter
And
ego, right?
So that's
you got
two
nice
examples,
Neil, and
and,
you got
and from France,
but so there will
that
be
builds on a
somebody sort of
huge
sat there
fund,
grumbling,
which
look at this,
French actors
tokenistic
can
nonsense.
right.
So for those of us who want to advocate for
becoming
including young
engaged,
people,
but on that, in
there's a
terms of
nuance
one's an
there
NGO,
in order
and
not
there's the
to
French
push people off
government,
the deep
and
end,
in
because
Africa we're
that's
looking at
actually
young criminal
counterproductive for
gangs.
them
You know,
and for
there
the
is no
wider
solution.
conversation on youth
But
inclusion.
there's
I
a
think that's
lot of
important to keep in
solutions,
mind.
and we should put them all to work where we can.
To international collaboration, which is what we're really talking about. And the fact of the matter is that what we've discovered is through these 600 local water forums that we've now established around the world, that's only been in a 12-month period. And we intend to triple that next year. What we have discovered is the fact that if I take, for example, a local water forum from Ramallah or Jenin in Palestine, okay, and I make them talk to a local water forum in West Jerusalem or in Tel Aviv, there's no problem whatsoever. Now that's international collaboration because they're coming together to talk about one specific problem which concerns them all. And that is science diplomacy. And then that really can form the basis of international collaboration because you're not going into all of the other national obstacles which otherwise would not permit you to have any sort of dialogue with regards to water or indeed any other subject.
In view of time, I would suggest maybe if there is a quick reaction from Suzanne on the question from Christian. So, and if not, maybe we can give space to one more question so that we allow someone else to take the floor. Me.
Thank you. My name is Karen Anderweg. I work for Wageningen University and Research in the Netherlands. Richard, I have a question to you. You were quite critical about the UN Water Conference, and I can think about many reasons why. But I wondered why your trust in one UN resolution is higher than 800 commitments.
What is the young perspective, right? And this is the other thing we haven't addressed. I looked this up before the session. There's some 2 billion people
I'm
under
a politician.
30 around the
I
world.
exaggerate sometimes.
I mean, made the point earlier. Is that like a
I mean, I can talk bullshit like the best.
You know, it's this American
so,
politics. No, absolutely not. Those
I'm
people
not
are
saying that
diverse
there's
as any
only
other.
going to be
So
one
just because you
resolution.
happen to be 24
What
or
I
whatever
am
doesn't
saying
mean
is
you
that
have either the
if
mandate
you
or
are
the
serious about
obligation to
having,
speak on
after
behalf of your whole
46 or
generation, I think
47
that's something
years,
we need to think carefully
a
about.
conference on water, then for God's sake, don't make it a trade fair. And that was it. That was basically a trade fair. The interactive dialogues were over 3 days, each nation state, and there's 193 of them, having 3 minutes to show a video or to say what they were pledging. And that was it. That's not a dialogue. There were very few opportunities for true dialogue. What we need to do is we truly need to unite world dialogue with regards to what is a global problem. And everybody says it's a global problem, but no one's prepared to create a global forum because they all want their slice of the cake. They all want to look as if they're the ones who are caring. They want to look as the ones, but they want to be caring so long as they're leading that program. And it's like I said before, we need to come to a point where if people say to us, what's in it for me? We say nothing, and they say, okay.
So just to close this conversation, we have one more question. Yes.
Is it okay? Yeah, for stirring this up. I actually would like maybe to have a mirror to, also triggered by you, Richard, but also by Suzanne, who said we should be positive, more positive approach. And it relates a little bit also to yesterday, my 20 years kind of attending this, talking about fragmentation of our sector, of being dysfunctional. It's fine, it's probably fair, but I'm also wondering, I never hear agricultural sector saying they're dysfunctional. I don't see world peace saying they're fragmented, whereas you could say so. So why are we a sector that shoot ourselves in the foot, saying we're 1-0 behind because we're fragmented? That's not our opening sentence. How can that be? Where do we come from?
Well, we talked
so that would be my kind
previously in the day with Joe on the UN conference, the UN Water Conference, and we were glad differently than in Dakar for the World Water Forum, that we were not isolated from the rest of the people. Because, if you want to
improve,
but we're not 1-0 behind. We're not.
You don't have to get an office of young people at the back of the hallway. No need for that.
What all of the sectors should be achieving.
You get a chair,
I'll give you an example.
you get a young people, you get a young person, or two if you want.
For example,
it's better.
World peace, international collaboration.
So that was great from the UN Water Conference. And I think sometimes
Russia.
Young people were not regarded as young people, but as
Susan?
Voices. And that's great, because that's
yes, I just wanted to add something, building on what was said from the colleague in the audience, but also building on what I said earlier about being positive.
That has nothing to do with the debate, that has nothing to do with
there is
the
a lot to
project or the
critique,
road
and
we
yes,
need to
there
have.
is an issue with the fact that there was no binding
that's
outcome
really
of the
important.
conference, and there is a lot to say about the commitments. The World
your
Resource
project
Institute
is
did a
pretty
nice
avant-gardist
study looking
regarding
at the
that.
different commitments and seeing how
because
many of them are
sometimes we
actually not
just let
tangible, how many
the
of
young
them don't have
people go.
funding behind
We
them,
have
and
the
so on.
finance,
But
support
still, I would
or
urge us
symbolic,
to stay positive, maybe
do
just
you
with a
work?
reminder, when the Mar del Plata conference ended in 1977, people were extremely pessimistic,
Neil,
and the
you
same
can call that
arguments
one
were
Ghana.
made. Nothing came out of it.
But
It
can
was a
I
useless conference. It
couldn't
had
agree
all
more.
sorts of hiccups
I mean,
in
I
its
was also there
preparation,
in
similar
Dakar, so the
to what
context
we've
here is
seen
that the
in the
World
run-up
Water
to
Forum,
New
there was
York,
a
I'd
youth
argue.
space,
But still, I think a
best
lot
of
came out of it
intentions,
in the end.
and
Yes,
Noemi's
we're not
very
where
visceral
we
response
should have
tells you
been,
everything you need to
but
know.
out of Mar del Plata, we had the
I don't wish
first
to offend
international
anybody,
decade for
was in the car
drinking
park,
water that was
and
established as a
it was
consequence of it.
essentially
Countries
a
started for the
children's
first
table,
time to develop wash plants.
in
It was
heat with no
really
air
the start of
conditioning.
countries
It was,
actually
it was
monitoring their
well-intentioned,
water
and again,
resources
I
and
don't want to sort of
developing
criticise the organisers.
monitoring
They
systems
were,
to
they
see
felt the
where
need
they
to
were
include youth.
at all
They
in
thought the
terms of
dedicated
water
youth space
resources
was
use.
the way to go.
So yes,
I
I
think a
do
lot of us
share a
who
lot
were
of
there learned that
criticism, but if we
actually
look at the
dedicated youth space is
counterfactual, where
exactly
the
what you
world
want
would
to
be
avoid.
if there hadn't
You
been
want
a
to
Mar
do
del
exactly
Plata,
as
and if
Alexander
there
says,
hadn't
which is
been
try to integrate
international
youth
decades, if there
at every
hadn't been
stage in
many
water
basin
use in
organizations
processes.
established
That's what
since
we
the
tried to do with New York.
1970s, if there hadn't been
Here
all
I'm
these
kind of marking
programs
my own homework.
that
That was my
supported
job,
different
right? Was
countries, or in
involve
which
as many
countries
young
supported each
people
other
as
on
possible
water,
at the conference at all
where would
levels
we
and
be
all stages.
now? And I think we can
could have
say
done
the
a lot
same
more,
for New York.
right?
Yes, it was
We had
maybe
visa
not
issues,
the
the
outcome
fact
that we
this
all
was at the
hoped
UN
for, but
headquarters,
if we hadn't
the
had
fact
New
that
York,
if you were
where
from a
would
civil
we be
society
moving at
organisation,
all?
let's
So
say
that's
in the
really a
global
plea
south that
for
didn't
being a
have
bit
legal
more
status in
optimist,
your
because that's
country,
also shaping
you
how we
couldn't
act.
register with the
If we
UN.
think we're doomed anyway, then
Only those
why
that
are we
have
still here?
legal documentation wherever
Well,
they're
thank
actually
you.
based in the
For
exports.
closing,
So
I would like
all
to
kinds
take
of
that
caveats, and I don't
message
wanna
of
sit here and
being
say, "Oh, we did such a
positive, and
fantastic
let's
job,"
just
because,
celebrate the
you know,
small
most
steps,
of the young
just
people in the world had
what
no
you were
idea that
saying
the
there.
conference
So
even happened, right? So
let's
not
start with this
pretend that,
conference.
you know,
This is the
everything was
perfect
solved
setup.
through this one event.
I'm pretty sure there's people
but we tried,
here
and
from many
for me, the
different
legacy,
countries,
I
so
hope
why don't
the
we start
legacy
with international
on the youth front
cooperation
will
at a
be
small scale Then we have a coffee break, and you have to be back in 30 minutes, 4:30. And then take advantage of this, and we can do some international cooperation here. And thank you to the panelists for your thoughts and for being here today.
Thank you, Valentina. I would like to add a special thanks. Thanks, of course, to my bold colleagues like me. And but a special thanks, first of all, to Valentina for accepting to be moderating last minute. You did it really well. And to Suzanne, who is in Oregon, so it's nine years earlier than us. So it's very early in the morning. So 9 hours. So it's very early. Thanks, Suzanne, to be so early in the morning to be participating for this session. Thanks, and please enjoy the coffee breaks. And we are going to discuss living labs. So we are going on a more concrete aspects of international cooperation. So please stay with us because we are going to get a bit more concrete later.
I'm 29.
Thank you.
Give me a break.
4 o'clock. We are back. Thank you.
Can I say two things very quickly? If you like the young professional logo, embrace it, make the most of it. I know people who've branded themselves as almost professional young professionals, and they're, in the cultural context that they're from, that's helped them a lot, and it's opened a lot of doors for them, and more power to them. Good for them. There are others who are much less comfortable with that label because in the circles that they move in, it leads to this kind of tokenistic, superficial inclusion. Understand that as well. So on the young professional thing, if you feel it's useful to you, then use it, and if not, that's fine too. The other thing is, quick point, I think we've won the argument on youth inclusion in like global water management governance processes. I don't think we need, in fact, the one thing I think we really, really ought to avoid is more sessions and discussions where we're sort of advocating for youth inclusion and full stop, and that's it. Because we've had that argument. There are young people in these venues, in these processes, at all levels now. Let's focus on how we can build capacity, develop skills, make a substantive contribution.
thanks for being back here with us. We have another exciting panel ahead of us, and we are going to discuss the living labs. Just something that is related to more the logistics. We have placed an evaluation form on your chairs, and if you don't see that, there are a few more available there. This is supposed to be a regular event of Water Europe, talking about international cooperation, international water dialogues. And we would like to know, since you have listened in how it went so far, we would like to know if you liked it, what in your opinion could be improved. So we would really appreciate your input so that we can get it better next time. So having said that, I would like to now move to the next session. We have a panel ahead of us, and the moderation will be by David. So that's my boss here. I'm going to give the baton to the boss. David, would you like to kickstart the next session? Thank you.
Thank you, Gaetano. I think I feel uneasy with being called your boss, but all right, I'll take it. Yeah, we're going to take a different approach now. And we're going to be focusing a lot more on the practical implementation of international cooperation on water. And this is done through the Living Lab approach. So this is a central theme to Water Europe, and it's also one of the central themes that we need to start looking at when we consider cooperation, and specifically international cooperation. So with that, I would like to invite up to the panel Henrik, Karin, Nora, and Antonio, who will provide us some of their input and their practical implementations of these living labs. Wherever you like. Yeah. Fantastic. I'll take the seat on the far end here, and we can start a little bit on the introductions of a living lab. I realized yesterday when we were having dinner, there were some conversations that we had about there's many jargon words that are being thrown around at this conference that maybe those that are in the water sector know very well, but those that aren't maybe struggle a little bit with what that is. And one of those is the living lab concept. So I thought, let me start with a little bit of an introduction to what a living lab actually really is, and what components it's taking into account. A living lab, according to the European network of living labs, and from Water Europe's point of view, is a multi-stakeholder platform that is looking at open innovation in real-world settings that is involving not only the scientific, the technical, but also societal inputs in order to create impact at local level. Now, when we look at that, we start to think, okay, but how does that work at an international dimension? And how do we bring in the international scope into that? So this is why we have this esteemed panel here with us. Each one of them is going to provide us with a 5-minute introduction about their living lab and the experiences that they've had with that. And then we'll have a discussion amongst ourselves. And here I'd be very happy for the panel to ask questions amongst yourselves. Once you start to see the living labs that each one is presented, and you can see some questions that come out of that. But I'd first like to obviously introduce each of them. So Henrik is the CEO of Sweden Water Research, and that is since 2019. It's a joint R&D company that is made up of 3 municipally owned water and wastewater utilities in Sweden. So he's been working in the environmental sector for more than 35 years, and he has a very unique profile in that he has strong research with his PhD as well as practical implementation. So Henrik will start, and he will give us our first introduction of that. Karin is from Wageningen University, and I like very much Karin's profile. When I asked her to send us a bit of an outline of the profile from what she's involved in, she mentioned that she was obviously the team leader of the water and food security team at Wageningen University and Research. She has a background in environmental sciences and international development. And for the past 15 years, she's been working on organizations of knowledge management, innovation, and sustainable agri-food systems. But here's the part I really liked. She says that she lives in the Netherlands. She has her favorite color of green and loves being around water and has no pets. So this is the best profile that we've had so far. So thank you for that. and Nora is an expert in water and sustainable development, and she has experience in the academic and the private sector. She's a co-founder of Bitter Green, and has academic positions in Belgium, IHE Delft, in the Netherlands, where she teaches on various aspects related to water management topics. Antonio, we've known for some years, and I was actually a little bit afraid with Antonio because I had heard that you'd retired. So to see you here with us is actually a pleasure. So thank you for being here. As the senior researcher at the Italian Water Research Institute, and he has many years of experience in water research management, and is leading the pillar on international development and international dimension for Water for All, and he will be telling us a little bit about that. So enough from my side. Actually, before I start, and so just to have a hands up in the audience, is there anybody here in the audience that is currently working in a living lab setting and potentially with an international dimension? Okay, fantastic. So we'll come back to you at the end of the session to ask for your inputs and exchange a little bit with the panelists. But from now, over to you, Henrik.
Right, thank you. Well, first of all, I'd like to introduce Søren Heinecke, who is here, and he's really part of this living lab, the Scandinavian slant. So he will be able to corroborate some of the findings I will try to present. Anyway, I think today we've seen a lot of the water people, they've left, and I think there's a lot of the living lab people still remaining. And I think this is a pity, because I think some of the dreams they talked about yesterday was actually achieving these goals, finding the value of water, which also requires financing of the water. So with this in mind, I would like to stress that I think that the water sector, we need to find our way into the overall picture of what is happening. I attended this second forum of climate adaptation regions last week in Ronneby. And during this session, I didn't find very many from the water industry. We were basically other people, NGOs and stuff, and we had some very lively discussions. And what came up was, of course, not only the water issue, although we all recognize that this will be severely affected by climate change, but actually the livelihood of people was one of the questions, like agriculture from that point of view. That's biodiversity, that entire system is changing, and this will influence our livelihood in general. From a northern perspective, we discussed bark beetles. I don't know if you've heard of them. They are particularly interesting for forests because they do severe damage to the forest. So other aspects were really brought up. And what I'm really trying to say here that a lot of these people who were there, they sort of envied us being the sort of, we are, as water sector, very, very well organized. We have our ways of actually getting our message through in many ways. So that is something that I think you all should remember. And basically, we are a monopoly, and that means that we need to sort of always have the trust of our end users, the consumers, etc. So with this, I will move on to what my conclusions were, or my conclusions in this is that the water services area, we are under great pressure at the moment to adapt to new climate conditions. And this is from customers. So, and I think we have the means to actually adapt. I see very much progress in our area. But we need to, of course, do things, we need to engage with society to foster water-wise cities, explain why we want to do these things, because they will be, to some extent, more costly perhaps than the traditional practices as we know them. And in this aspect, we need to go beyond technical installations. We need to have this social inclusive aspects. And I think that living lab methodology could be pivotal for scaling up and mainstreaming new practices. It's a way of actually explaining what we're trying to do. I also think that when we start working with living labs, or especially from the sort of municipal side of things, we need to understand that we need to have a long-term development plan of the living lab. It's not enough to just settle for a project. We need to set aside funds to actually maintain it for a longer time. This will be there to demonstrate new practices. That's the key issue. Next slide. Next slide, please. Right, and this is something we've been working with, and I think is being recognized in the Scandinavian area. This is from Greater Copenhagen area, and this is where Sir and I have cooperated a lot. So I think from a political viewpoint, I think it's quite clear that the main challenge right now is to implement and scale up the green transition in a complex problem area. And actually, we also wrote a white paper where we try to figure out what was really in the Greater Copenhagen area, areas that needed to be developed and taken to a next level. And with this, I would like the next slide. So, one of the things that we're trying to promote, and I think we come a bit on our way, and this is really the international part of my presentation. We've managed to initiate EU climate adaptation mission between the cities of Malmö and between the city of Copenhagen. And this is really taking a big step, I would say. And the goal in Water for All, for example, is actually to have a living lab as a result of this collaboration. I think we have a lot to gain from that sort of thing. So that's really my international part of it. And I would say it's very, very difficult indeed, even on a European level, to do this sort of cross-country, cross-border collaboration. Next slide, please. We have a lot of training in this area, and I've been working with living labs for, I think, 25 years or more. One of the key examples here is the eco-city of Augustenborg in Sweden, in Malmö. Where we worked in a smaller level, where we worked within the city, having real estate owners, I think we talked about it earlier on, the water services, and also the city of Malmö, working together to find ways of overcoming problems. And could I have the next slide? What we did here was, I think for that time, quite revolutionary. This is blue-green infrastructure, and it took a lot of persuasion, but it was a lot of determination also to get this to work. So this is still, I think, one of the finest examples of how blue-green, in this case blue infrastructure, can be integrated within a city district. Next slide, please. One of the key aspects here is that we also formed the Scandinavian Green Infrastructure Association, and this is still working. It's been there for now more than 20 years, and this was set up to promote the new technology, to showcase what was really happening. And I think it's important that we also have these type of instruments, so when sort of all the glamour is gone from the first place installation, there's still things to show and exhibit. Next slide, please. The thing and I think this is rather funny, we've moved on from there because things have changed. That was really having the blue infrastructure in place. And what we now moved on to is, of course, using stormwater in a smarter and more efficient way. And I couldn't help noticing that in the handout or in the booklet we were given and when we entered here, well, this is, we have the same picture. So I think this is very simple technology. And what we're trying to do here is actually to implement it. And that is another question, because we need to go through a lot of red tape. And that is really the purpose of what we want to do here. This is the Rewise project, and I'm very, very proud of being part of it. And it's been enabling us to move further in a very rapid way. Next slide, please. Yeah, just to show you some examples. Green walls are, I think this place is wonderful. If you come there, I will show you. Next slide. And this is just part of the installation on reuse of stormwater and nutrients within the buildings of this in one other place. Next slide, please.
Thank you very much. Actually, just before we started, I actually forgot to ask a first question, which is, what has motivated you to start your career in the water sector? What at least drove you into this sector? And then once you've answered that, if you can then hand over to Karen and just answer the same question before you start, Karen.
To be honest, I don't know. It just was the thing for me. I've always been working with this, so from childhood and on.
Same question. Well, obviously, I don't dare to say now the money or salary or a career path. I think I was never drawn into the water sector, but I'm more intrigued by how we can secure food security. And of course, food security also requires water security. So that's also why I'm working in the team Water and Food Security, where we work on water quality, but also water quantity issues related to food production. And especially the food security part really motivates me to wake up every day and to go to work. Yes, yeah, I would like to take you along to East Africa, where we are implementing the ReFuture project. ReFuture is a 7.5-year project to advance regenerative agriculture, regenerative food systems. It is a collaboration between Wageningen University in the Netherlands, Egerton University in Kenya, Muni University in Uganda, and Bahir Dar and Jemma University in Ethiopia. The aim of ReFuture is to regenerate, but also rethink, redesign, renew the future of food and food systems. Earlier this afternoon, Professor Onema said we need global action, but it starts at a local level. And that's also what we are really trying to do, to unlock the potential of local innovations towards more regenerative agriculture. So what we've done, we have set up 4 living labs, I must say, in 3 countries, Uganda, Kenya, and Ethiopia, that aim to advance existing innovations, but also co-create new innovations. And for me, the essence in the word living lab is actually in the living, so it should be like a real life experience. It should involve real people, real actors. They should really have a stake. And in the word lab, laboratory, experiment, learn, make mistakes, fail, try again. And it's also all about connecting people, connecting different actors, because I think when you connect people, when you connect ideas, that's where the magic happens. So what we've done in these living labs is to convene doers, so agricultural entrepreneurs, smallholder farmers, but also traders, with thinkers, people that have the knowledge, scientific knowledge, and with enablers, policymakers, banks, everything that concerns the enabling environment. And besides connecting doers, enablers, and thinkers around innovations, we are also connecting different innovations with each other for them to learn from each other. And we are connecting the innovations in the different countries. So to stimulate South-South collaboration and also North-South collaboration. And this approach has been really helpful to unlock local knowledge Next slide, please. So to unlock local knowledge and to connect local knowledge with university knowledge. So this is the chairman of Mugebo Foundation. Mugebo is Farmers Coming Together. And when we visited him, he said, I feel so humbled because I have never been inside a university. But now the university professors are coming to me to learn what I'm doing to get my soil more regenerative and more sustainable. Next slide, please. Yeah, and this is the chairman of Green Vision. And he also said that we are simple farmers with low education. Some people can't even read or write. But through the Living Lab, we are learning and they are building confidence that what they are doing can work. And then I think that is really the strength of the Living Lab, to connect people, to help them advance innovations, to connect local knowledge, indigenous knowledge, with more explicit knowledge, like what is written in scientific papers. That was it, David.
Fantastic. Thank you. It's super interesting. Thank you. And I think that this idea of the Living Labs shows real cooperation amongst countries, but not only on water aspects, but how water affects all the other aspects around that. So that was a really interesting example of how we can, I think we were talking about it before, one small drop makes a bigger and bigger, and then this is the impact that we see at the end. So we stay in Africa, and we go on to Nora. And first, before we start, Nora, what drove you into the water sector? And then following that, your Living Lab, please.
Yes, thank you, David. I don't know whether it really drove me into the water sector, but I love water sports. I love swimming, surfing, all the like. And I didn't start studying water. I went into soil. And actually, to be honest, the only exam I ever really failed was hydrology. And look at me now. So I don't know whether this was some unconscious thing that I needed to show that, yes, I will do water. But here I am now. I love water because it's so cross-cutting, right? It's like it's at the core of ourselves, and everybody has something to say about water. And I think that engaging aspect is really what made me stay in water. So I will be talking to you about our experiences in the ISIS project. That's a project that is looking at climate services development, and more specifically at how we can integrate local knowledge with scientific knowledge in the production of climate services. So just to set the scene, climate services is any transformation of climate data into whether it is projections, forecasts, but also it could be economic analysis, evaluation, anything that helps different people to use that information to mitigate climate change, to adapt to climate change, or to drive policy changes. So in the ISIS project, we have 7 living labs. 5 of them are located in Europe, and then we have 1 in Georgia, which is technically also Europe, and one in Lesotho in Africa. And the consortium is a mix of research partners, but also NGOs and then the institutions that are going to adopt these products, these climate services that are being developed. So we have set up these living labs, and in the next slide, please. So what we're really focusing on is how are we going to now integrate different types of knowledges? And I wanted to show this slide because it's interesting to think, okay, what is local knowledge? And often what we think is local knowledge is indigenous knowledge, which is true, it is local knowledge, but there's more to that. When we think about local knowledge, the way we are defining it in a project is just the way we as individuals make sense of reality and kind of the things we know or the experience we mobilize to solve problems. And so that can be indigenous knowledge, but it's also sometimes structured knowledge that can come from university, but it can also come from practice, right? So I really liked what you showed, like this idea that people are humbled because they haven't been to university. No, you have a ton of structured knowledge because you've been practicing something and learning from your experience. and that's also a very valid knowledge. So showing this myriad of knowledges and then how it can come to producing better or more usable climate services is what we're focusing on. The other thing that we are saying is that we shouldn't just focus on the knowledge of the end user that we want to connect to. Actually, there's a whole chain of when we're looking at a problem, we're trying to understand that problem, we're trying to find solutions for that problem, and then make those solutions operational, you know, make a product that somebody wants to pay for. There's a whole chain of actors that are involved, and they all have different types of knowledge, including local knowledge. Next slide, please. And so we are doing that in different living labs, and of course, when you do that, it means that you have to involve these different actors along the value chain or the production chain of the climate service. And you can see that then the context obviously really matters, right? So what you're seeing in the left top corner is one of our living labs in the south of Spain that is focusing on drought with farmers. They have an issue of drought, looking at their olive groves and how they will change or maybe produce different type of crops, versus the one on the right, which is our living lab in Lesotho, where there's a collaboration which stems more from a disaster risk management history, collaboration with the Red Cross, but then also with a lot of governmental agencies and dam operators. And so the living lab is really about starting these conversations between people, right? And kind of valuing each other's piece of the puzzle to first understand the problem and then come to what do we actually need to now solve this issue. Next slide, please. And to just give you a glimpse of how it looks like then in this creation of a climate service in Malawi, here is the example, is that when talking to different stakeholders in the platform, we learn that actually local people have their own kind of climate information they're using to adapt to change. So for example, they know from the type of wind direction through, you know, they learned from their parents or grandparents' generational understanding, or even the type of animals they see at a specific point of the year. They know that there's a drought coming. Yeah? And then they also, through different ways of disseminating that information, it is not just about giving an app, they have different channels through which they actually absorb information and respond to it. And so what we're doing in the project is collect all these different elements and see, okay, how can we add value to that? And to do that, it really means sitting down, you know, equaling leveling the playing field, like we're all bringing a piece of the puzzle, and then showing how new knowledge, new science can actually add value to the local knowledge that is already there. Thank you.
Thank you, Nora. I like very much this idea of the different knowledges that you mentioned. It's actually something very close to my heart that I did in my own PhD, and something that I came across that I found very interesting was the concept of hybrid knowledge, which is that co-creation idea between the different bottom-up and top-down knowledges. So very, very interesting, and we'll come back to that as we start to ask some questions. Over to you, Antonio. What is it that drove you to the water sector, before you tell us a little bit about Water for All and an international dimension?
Well, now I am an hydrologist now, but I am a vivid example of coherence, because I graduated in vegetation ecology, and then I was very much interested into ecosystem restoration, but then I realized that the only point to start from was the catchment, the watershed. Then that's why I started to study hydrology and watershed management, and that's why now I'm still involved into river basin management, which is my major focus. But I'm still a vegetation ecologist, I would say. I've been asked to tell you something about the tools, the international tools that we are developing within Water for All. I don't know what is the degree of knowledge that you have about this partnership. just want to say that this is one of the major, I would say the largest water-related initiative that has been ever funded by the Commission. It is a partnership that brings together more than 80 members, more than 30 countries, not only in Europe, and the budget that supports this initiative is around €500 million for the whole life of the project. The Water for All initiative partnership, the whole name is Water Security for the Planet, is structured in with 5 work groups. We call them pillars. There is one that is about defining the vision of the Water for All. There's another one that is regarding the launching of common calls for projects. And there are 2 pillars that are about developing tools for cooperation within the member states and for the development of living labs. And there is another one, which is the one in which I am involved, that is about international solutions, how to bring the tools that we will be developing within Water for All, within the member states, mostly Europeans, but not only, how to bring those tools outside of Europe in all the world. So I must say that, as I said, not only Europeans, member states are present in the Water for All, but there are some others that are quite far from Europe, for example, South Africa, Brazil, and a few others. Well, the international activities of the Water for All will follow 3 main directions. The first direction is the development of international cooperation agreements. This part of the activities is about first of all, designing the international strategy of Water for All, so which topics to tackle in which part of the world, and then it will set the scene for all the international activities. I mean that we will be collecting information on existing memorandum of understanding between countries, bilateral or multilateral agreement for cooperation on research and technology in the water sector. But not only this, we will try to enlarge the number of the existing memorandum of understanding. We also will collect information about we will extend our contacts with big key countries in the world. We are now currently discussing at government level with big countries like China, India, Brazil, which recently became member of the Water for All partnership, in order to enlarge the partnership to include them. Just think that just adding China and India to the partnership will bring us to involve countries that accounts for almost half of the world population. We also are in contact with international organizations like UNEP, UNDP, the World Bank, FAO, the EU-China Water Platform, the India-Europe Water Partnership, also with the UN, a very huge UNDP program in Uzbekistan on the Aral Sea, which I discovered to be a huge, marvelous example of activity, because it brings together the ecological restoration, the social development, the economical development, bringing together funds coming from donors that are spread worldwide. So it is with that's even more important with the involvement of local stakeholder, which is one of the best example as far as to my knowledge of such kind of initiatives. We are discussing with those with this partnership with those international initiatives in order to link as possible them together to guarantee that our approach is somehow represented in all those initiatives. And we are also involved in we are involved into the program development of big water-related initiatives, conferences in the world. We have been cooperating with the UN Water Conference in New York recently, but now we are discussing, we are into the development of the program of the 10th World Water Forum in Bali that will take place in 2024. We have been cooperating with the GSTIC conference held in Brazil a few months ago, and we will be present. We are also engaged into the programming activities in the High WRA conference in Beijing in September this year. The second main direction of activities for international activities for Water for All is the support for the achievement of monitoring of the SDG, water-related SDGs, in particular SDG 6. And we, for example, we will be forcing approved research projects funded by the Water for All initiative. By the way, Water for All will fund a call for project every year for 6 years, and there are most of those €500 million that I mentioned will go in that direction. We will force the approved projects by the Water for All, funded by Water for All, to highlight specific contributions toward the SDG 6 implementation and monitoring. And the third direction of activity is about the developing of innovative tools for international cooperation. In particular, we are studying how to enlarge the calls that we are, the possibility for having calls that now we are funding for only for member states toward the possibility to have them open to third countries. It is a very challenging initiative because there are some limitations, while it is quite easy for African countries to be involved because they are eligible for funding from the Commission, because the Water for All is co-funded by the Commission. This becomes a little bit challenging for countries like India and China because they are not eligible, and there are a lot of political issues to be discussed with them because they are very much interested into having a equal footing. That's the reason for them to be recalcitrant, to be involved into the Horizon Europe and other framework programs. So we will be studying those possibilities. We also will have plans for create possibilities for cooperation between water utilities in member states and outside. This is a very new thing. We have already had some contacts with water utilities in Africa, and they were very, very much interested in having contacts and exchange of practice and knowledge and experience with European water utilities. We also will support international trade shows in which there will be European pavilions. We will not be able to pay the participation of European companies to those trade shows, but we will try to organize common scoping workshop between European business initiatives and local business operators in order to find common field for cooperation and for business. We will also pay the possibility for students or researchers coming from third countries to have some researcher mobility with our countries, or on the other opposite way, to pay mobility for European researchers to go working in research institutions abroad. We will also support water centers for excellence that have been mentioned in the previous session, in the previous panel. We will support them as well, and as well we will support capacity building. We are already ready to launch for the next call possibility for traveling to third countries, mostly African countries. And we will also be very much engaged in launching living labs in third countries. Actually, I was a little bit, dubious about this possibility, because in my understanding, living labs require quite well-structured level of stakeholder NGOs activities that are maybe a little bit easier in developed countries, while I was expecting to be not so well developed in third countries. But it was a surprise for me, I must say, because we had a very clear request from, for example, African entities to which we had some discussion on this topic. They are very much interested in sharing their experience of living labs with, let's say, the European countries. So in this case, we will be able to, we will be engaged in facilitating contacts between living labs in Europe or in member states and with the ones that are existing outside. For example, facilitating also exchange of knowledge, and facilitating also the development for third countries living labs, the development of information tools, videos, and this kind of initiatives that can be costly probably for those countries. We are into our first phase of Water for All. The forecasted phases will be 3. We are entering into the second phase that we start in 2024. The project will finish in 2030, when the last projects will be evaluated as a final evaluation. And that's all on my side. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Antonio, for that 5-minute brief on the Water for All. And you can see that there's a lot of activities that are happening on that side. But I'd like to open the discussion a little bit more and make it a little bit more dynamic with the audience. But I'd like to start first with the panel. Obviously, Antonio has mentioned this idea of this international development, the dimensions that's coming from Water for All. And specifically this idea that he finds it a little bit challenging, this idea of a living lab and an international scope, etc. So I'd like to just see from your own perspectives how you see this idea of international cooperation with a living lab approach. So maybe Karin, I can start with you and see how you see that.
Thank you, David. Well, I think that a living lab should be a mean and to a certain end, and it's not an end in itself. And living labs, you hear them everywhere. They're everything is called a living lab nowadays. But I think you should really think about carefully, what do I want to achieve? Like if you want a quite simple technological advancement, which you could call an innovation, I won't bring out all the artillery to shoot a fly. So be very careful when you will set up a living lab. And the other thing is, I don't believe in a one-size-fits-all. It's very context-specific. The living lab that we have in Kenya, Kenya is quite bustling with innovation, so it's really bottom-up, local entrepreneurs taking the leads, bringing things to the table. But the living lab in Ethiopia, which is much more centralized, organized in a governmental way, has to go through the government. So we still bring out all these stakeholders, but the government is first. So make it context specific and really carefully think about what you want to achieve before setting up this whole living lab multi-stakeholder, bringing everybody on board kind of thing. Would you like to add, Nora? Or correct me, maybe?
No, I wanted to mention one thing, and it's not to contradict Richard, although maybe that would be good, but I think when you set up a living lab, one question that everybody has to have clear is, what is in it for me? And so when you work with these stakeholders, it is very difficult to set it up, and it is difficult to get them motivated. So one thing is indeed what for, and have this a common problem, or at least some part of this development is that is interesting for the people participating in the living lab. And then also really being conscious about managing that process and managing it until the end, right? So to provide resources, I think it's great if Water for All is setting resource or making resources available for people just to be able to come together and have a conversation and for that common goal, because it's sometimes difficult to understand where you can help each other if you're not just brought into the same room.
I would say that, first of all, I want to clarify that Water for All will not fund create any living lab, because otherwise it is nonsense. It is not auto-centered initiative. So we will make our effort in order to facilitate the life of those living labs, and to network them, to allow networking and exchange. What I want to say is that I think that, as you said, there is no a tool that is fit for in any case. For every case. So I think that we have to, that's why we are developing the international strategy plan, because there are some initiatives, that some part of the world in which common classical research projects is possible as a sense, but there are other places in which maybe the creation of knowledge hubs or TAPs, or the scientist mobility as a sense, which requires less effort, it is less structured, do not require such a big, competence and functionality of the framework, the total framework. So I want to recall that into the white paper that has been prepared by Water Beyond Europe, the work group, the document that has been introduced by Gaetano at the beginning of the session, there is a section that I strongly subscribe, in which it is written that there is a tool for every situation. Low income, mid-range countries, rich countries, and we have to adapt. That's what we will do in Water for All. We have to adapt the tools to the boundary conditions, to the ecosystem that is around it.
Yes, obviously I'm quite thrilled that things are happening in this direction. I think I think we're talking about people and humans, really. That's the sort of context. So from my point of view, I mean, I've been working in other countries than my own region, but what I find is that we have the same sort of needs in many ways to be included, to be seen, and that's really the essence. And I think when we try to introduce these new, well, mindsets of water that we are probably need to do, we need to address it on a way so that it can be understood by the ones who will actually use them. That's really what I think. And I think it's very good that we could form this type of alliance from this meeting also, and introduce these new game shapers really to the water industry. This is new to much of the water industry. We're still looking at somebody up there to help us provide some sort of regulation. I think we have a lot of things that we can actually do on a local level, scale up to a national level, and even to a European level. So I don't think we should just, sort of not use these tools. We should use them. This is an innovation in itself.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with this this concept. In the end, I think when we were discussing before, Karen, you mentioned this idea that a living lab is a concept that we've come up from in the Western world, and we're trying to bring this concept and methodology outside of where we are working. And it doesn't mean that that concept and that methodology is correct. And I think what you're mentioning here, Henrik, this idea that we're working with people, we're trying to innovate with people, it doesn't matter if we call it a living lab, it doesn't matter if it's called an action group or whatever else it is. We understand that there's a certain amount of criteria that makes things work at whether local level or bringing in an international dimension. So you want to call it a living lab or you want to call it something else, that's perfectly fine. But the idea of bringing everybody together, I think this is where the keys are. I'd like to open it up to the audience now, and I know there were some that had these living labs, that you had your own experiences. If you'd like to share a little bit of your own experience on living labs, or you have a question for the panel, or indeed a comment, now is a good moment that you can just raise your hand and ask. If not, I've got a few more questions for them myself. There you go, just behind. I'll bring you the mic.
Thank you. How are you planning to make a living lab live after the life cycle of the project?
Whose question for?
For everybody.
Whoever knows. Yeah. So, Karen, you got the mic?
Yep. So the question is, how can you sustain the living lab after its lifetime? I think that is indeed a very important point. At this moment, if I talk about a ReFuture project that I'm working on currently, we have a 7.5-year project after which the funding ends. But we hope that due to the good results and the successes that we can show after 7.5 years, that it will be able to attract more funding, also of banks, of other organizations. There are voices that say that it should be kind of self-sustained, and you can also ask farmers to pay for the services of a living lab. I doubt a little bit about that, honestly, but that's my personal opinion. Because I also think that could be a function of the government or of other organizations. And actually the funding is not that large, because what you need is just some people that bring together other people. So it doesn't require that much effort and that much funding in the end to set up a living lab and to have it running.
Yes, please. Søren, this one is for you. How do you sustain a living lab?
Thank you for that question, Henrik. I've been looking forward to answer that, so I've prepared for a long time. I started working on establishing a water-oriented living lab in a Danish context back in 2016 when the British voted for Brexit. And to this day, I still haven't managed to make two neighboring publicly owned water utility companies work together on demonstrating the same thingy. But I have a lot of stakeholders, companies with innovative ideas trying to kick in doors, unlocking all the resources and competences in the public utility sector, which we all agree at a national level visions have been formulated and drawn up. All agree that that is the way forward. We need to unlock, break down the doors, and it's all publicly owned, so it shouldn't be that much of a problem. But these innovative companies, they're still running around demonstrating the same thing over and over again with the different utility companies, etc. So how do we try to sustain that? The mission has always been to figure out a way to build a viable mechanism. Well, we haven't figured that out yet, but at one point a couple of years ago, I was kind of giving up. But then we had, Henrik and I and other good people took a study trip to the Netherlands and visited Water Alliance and Wetses and the impressive piece of machinery they're driving down there, which you can call a living lab. It's another type of living lab, but it's also a living lab. And they said, well, you know, something like this, it takes at least 15 years to establish. So, great. Happy I went back home and thought, all right, I'm not obsolete yet. I can work for another 5-6 years before I can shoot myself. And in came Water for All. And so they're picking up, bringing in more resources. So we're still at it. And I think, trying to say something specific, what we are looking at now and have recently accomplished to have some sort of confirmation. It looks as if we have managed to establish a strategic alliance around the Strait of Øresund, connecting Malmö and Copenhagen, as Henrik said. And I'm a little bit of an optimist in terms of us actually being able to have an agreement, because it doesn't take that much resources for them to, because the larger cities, the large resourceful stakeholders, there's a little bit of money that they need to put in the pool together, and we can have some sort of platform. It's basically just a forum with some sort of governance structure, which is connected to some political level, down to the practical level. But the thing is, I mean, you said that it's very important that you figure out what you want to achieve. I think the problem here is that there's not one thing that these stakeholders can agree on that they need to achieve. It's a gazillion different things, and what you need one to offer is not necessarily of primary interest to that particular stakeholder. He wants access to something else, which you need something. I mean, it's what do you call that game of domino? I mean, how do you knock that one piece over that can start knocking the other pieces over? That's very difficult. It takes a long time. There are not many projects that can be in it for that long. So great that we have now we have a 7-year partnership, and there was another 5-year partnership before that. Ultimately, one important lesson in terms of sustaining stuff, we need public funding, right? That's what we learned from the Netherlands. This cannot be sustained on a market level. You need at least 50% public funding, always. That was a bit lengthy, sorry, but that's when you catch me unprepared. It's just done talking, sorry.
Thank you. I think we have a conclusion at least. 50% public funding.
If I can add one thing, because sometimes we're setting up new mechanisms or organizations and we always think that that should continue forever. So we need to sustain it. But at a certain moment, you might have reached your goal. And it's not necessary anymore to have that living lab. It is still the mean. And if you are at the end, you can also solve the whole organization of the living lab.
Very shortly, I quite agree with you. The thing is that I believe that the cities and stuff, where we are living labs, and so we can never stop, but we can change the direction of what we're doing. So, and that's something that we need to do, because we can never stop.
Yes, and then if you change your direction, is the living lab still the mechanism that you want to use for reaching your objectives?
I think from the sort of city point of view, I think we can use a lot of the content within the structure. So basically, I think the methodology, we change it along with new directives, but obviously there will have to be this change, and that's also part of the you know, ever changing reality that we're fronting.
Yeah, thank you very much for these inputs. I think we could continue right into the evening with these discussions, as they incredibly interesting. But unfortunately, we have to cut it here. So I'd like to thank each and one of you for coming here today and presenting your living lab. So a big round of applause to everybody here. Thank you. And so, well, I'll ask you to make your way from the stage. So thank you so much, so that we can now invite up Karine Cassé and Lindsay Kenyon. And they are young water professionals that are going to provide us with their feedback and the wrap-up of this panel session. So over to the two of you.
Hello everyone. So reflecting on what we've heard in this discussion panel on the Living Lab experience, a first element that caught my attention is that in each of the Living Lab presented, we have a space where the implementation of global water goals and then also sustainable development goals take shape locally, and this then, thanks to the orchestration of multiple stakeholders, and this orchestration is always in the making and being reconfigured. So there are special places in that sense, because democratic governance of water cannot be, of course, separated from acting local and engaging with actors from the whole society, and especially those who are left behind, usually in that process. So depending on the setting, it can be women, it can be youth, it can be small-scale, smallholder farmers also, etc. And so these pillars, even if they can appear as basics, when we try to reach democratic governance of resources, we can never take them for granted. We've still to find ways and to innovate to find solutions that enable their implementation in practice. And so this is a matter of acting local, but in that case, while bridging territories and also collaborating, and sometimes collaborating beyond borders. And then the approach of the Living Lab presented before shows that international cooperation gains in insight when it keeps its feet grounded into local concern. And this point can easily sometimes be lost sight of by water professionals or decision makers, because of the specific context of the organizations in which we evolve, and from the head office of large organizations, sometimes this is an issue. So it's not easy to reconcile the dimension of water policy and the achievement of territorialized water goals and objectives. So yeah, there is often a division of tasks here, and this is in bridging these two words that I think Living Lab can bring a special input, and then where there are ingenious tools that we need to continue support and also to learn from. Cooperation between this variety of factors, it is bridging different scales, connecting different geographies, even forms of exchange, as it was materialized in the interaction of that panel. And also, it can this cooperation can foster forms of cooperation between the living labs themselves. This is an interesting sort of decentralized cooperation that we will maybe need to explore further. And so one possible angle to consider is that international cooperation beyond Europe can move forward thanks to partnership between the living labs as such, to share knowledge, to build common experiences, for instance. And this could be a possible contribution to the water action agenda to improve impacts towards achieving SDG 6. So this work is partially initiated through Horizon projects, as we saw, such as the project Reways, Resilient Water Innovation Economy, where Henrik is part of that project, and the living labs involved in Reways. So in this case, this is cooperation between living labs, but within the boundaries of Europe. So they meet and they form competency groups, that is to say, like community of practices, but action-oriented. So their objective is to solve, as Henrik mentioned, common water-related issues. So in that case, we have the Living Lab of Scania in Sweden, the Living Lab of the Midlands in the UK, Living Lab also in Spain, the Iberian Living Lab, and also a Living Lab in Poland, in Poznan. So this type of inter-living lab collaboration could be a source of inspiration for cooperation between European living labs and living labs that are operating outside of Europe. Then another type of boundary that the living labs can enable to overcome is the generational boundary. So at WNB, we're coordinating a work package within the project Reways on stakeholder engagement and governance. And in that frame, so we are organizing competency groups and supporting their implementation. And in the case of Reways, in the case of the Living Lab of Scania, we had workshop to implement that community of practice, and the objective was to enhance the engagement of citizens in the water management and in the Reways technologies. And so we had an interesting discussion during the last meeting about the involving of children within to involve children with the support of schools and also the educational staff in the design of the rehabilitation of a water-friendly garden. And so this is also an interesting type an interesting form of involving children within that water management process, in that case in dialogue with the architects and the real estate agency. So this is just an idea. It hasn't taken form yet, but it's been only underlined and brought up during our discussions. So just to show that these living labs are then a place where some new types of endeavors and also interaction between stakeholders can take shape. So it can be across borders, but also across generational boundaries, to give just a few examples. Talking about youth. So we need to think about youth, but in its plural forms, because it encompasses different realities and experiences. So youth can mean children, but also can refer to young activists or even young water professionals, as it has been discussed before. And by the way, why young water professionals representation matters? So, because this is in the water management and governance ecosystems that decisions are framed and then translated into practice, that visions also for water management are thought. And so combine obviously with the experience of people having evolved in that sector for a certain time, involving youth gives also the opportunity to integrate renewed practices and to go maybe beyond the boundaries of a sector or professional environment with its own language, vocabulary, and leading then to certain types of addressing water challenges. And so these sometimes can carry the constraint of defining contours and reinventing them to some extent by the inclusion of new profiles can be something that is something that we need. And at another level, I think this is just simply a question of ethics, in the sense that it enables young professionals to train, to acquire skills, and then in turn to take action for water. So yeah, I think we would all agree on the fact that no words, and not even the water word, can develop in a healthy way without taking care of the prospects that it opens up for the younger generation. And I will now close my talk by highlighting that water innovation is, of course, not only about technology, and I think we can understand that between the line of what has been said before in that panel, and that to find innovative solutions to water problems, we need to look at the vision we want to invent for water, and in particular with the help of social sciences. To come back to the project Reways, where we connect with other Horizon Europe projects, we try to find through that way methodological tools to assess the processes of stakeholder engagement and the processes of co-production of knowledge in the water sector. And the idea is to conduct a social learning evaluation where we identify obstacles and key success factors to stakeholder engagement in the water sector by comparing the results with other projects in the same field. And also this relates to what has been mentioned in terms of the sustainability of the Living Lab, which is not only enabled by finance issues, but also by long-term engagement of the the people that are working to maintain and make this living lab live. So yeah, just to say that innovation can not only be driven by this type of approach, but cannot only be driven, by a technological approach, but innovation should be understood also in that way. We need to think finally about hybridity. This is what is at stake. And to do so, we have a lot to gain from a diversified water world, with water professionals that are trying to question and to push also the borders of the water sector, and to build bridges, notably with other areas and sectors or ecosystems, such as sustainable food systems, that it has been mentioned, or circular economy, soil preservation, etc. So yeah, this is all.
Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure to be here as a young water professional. My name is Lindsay Kenyon, and I'm a hydrogeologist at IHE Delft Institute for Water Education. I've been really happy about being at this conference and how we're all on board with the things that we need to do to improve as a water-smart society. One critical aspect that has resonated with me during this session and the rest of the conference is the power of repetition and emphasizing the importance of water and collaboration. The more we reinforce this message ourselves, the less likely we are to ignore its significance. This has all made me feel motivated and inspired to continue my career as a hydrogeologist internationally. Also, being surrounded by our colleagues who feel just as invigorated has reaffirmed my own commitment to international cooperation, particularly while being away from my home in the United States. Regarding my role as a youth water activist, I want to say that I wholeheartedly agree that water sector employees should also assume that role. However, it's vital for our society to foster an enabling environment that empowers individuals to embrace their inner activist, but most importantly, as an advocate. While I was in New York at the UN Water Conference, I had the chance to attend seminars where Indigenous peoples from around the world voiced that they felt they lacked the ability to participate in decision-making, and their community best practices were not regarded as of equal importance to those using their lands for water use and development. The individuals in one specific talk expressed 3 components to water management strategies prioritized in their community, which include respect, reciprocity, and relatedness. As a future water manager, these deeply resonated with me. Respect entails respecting the intrinsic value of nature and understanding the importance of preserving ecosystems, while reciprocity and relatedness both require us to consider an integrated approach to water resource management that necessitates collaboration among many stakeholders, including governments, communities, indigenous groups, researchers, and businesses. This embodies the approach of the Living Lab. Living labs are dynamic spaces where business and research collaborations can come alive, creating market opportunities and facilitating scientific advancement. What sets them apart is their emphasis on user engagement and participation, and this is where the youth stakeholders can and should play a crucial role. Young scientists, young business professionals, and young community leaders bring a fresh outlook unencumbered by conventional patterns of thought, allowing us to approach challenges from new angles and bring our innovative ideas to the table that we're all looking for. One of the fundamental principles of Living Labs is inclusivity. They aim to incorporate users as equal contributors rather than mere actors. This means that the Living Lab experience is designed to address the needs of diverse stakeholders. By creating an inclusive space, we ensure that the products and solutions developed in Living Labs cater to a wide range of users, leaving no one behind. However, for Living Labs to truly succeed in driving international cooperation, there are certain actions that we as youth stakeholders must take. First and foremost, we need to equip ourselves with a clear understanding of what a Living Lab is and how it functions. Some of us, even this week, have expressed that they had never heard of that concept before. This requires effective communication and education from our current leaders, who must teach the concept to us and mentor us to become resourceful, considerate, reflective leaders. As Socratic seminars help students understand the value of critical thinking and debate, Living Labs can be used in the classroom to foster effective communication, improve team dynamics, and facilitate innovation in a participant-centered approach. By equipping ourselves with a deep understanding of how they work and operate, young people can become valued contributors to their design and implementation. As emerging leaders, we have the opportunity to assume leadership roles within Living Labs, steering the way towards collaborative and inclusive solutions. In doing so, we align with the vision of Water Europe and its vertical visionary leadership teams, which drive the implementation of the Water Europe Water Vision and the Water Smart Society. Advocating for the inclusion of Living Lab principles across many disciplines, particularly in our education systems, is crucial. By urging our teachers teaching even below a postgraduate level to embrace Living Lab methodologies and use the toolkits we've already created, we can build an ecosystem that echoes the things that we've been saying at this conference and at the UN Water Conference, where we value water as a society without question. An ecosystem that nurtures creativity, problem solving, and collaboration, but from an early age. We need to start delegating our innovation resources to also include mentorship to play the long game in the goals we are trying to achieve. While we build and adapt as our current strategic vision, we must get our future leaders prepared to deliver the vision. I believe that Living Labs hold tremendous potential for international cooperation, and as a young stakeholder, we have a significant role to play in fostering this. By embracing the principles of Living Labs, educating ourselves, and advocating for their inclusion in our education systems, we can ensure that our voices are heard, our ideas are valued, and our contributions are instrumental in addressing the challenges our world faces. So, as we come to the end of my time, I would like to extend my gratitude to David and Gaetano and the rest of the organizing committee for curating this insightful panel discussion in Living Labs experience. However, before I invite Gaetano back to the stage, I would like to take my last moments to ignite the rest of us in this room a sense of purpose and action. Let us use the Living Labs as tools to reaffirm our commitments made at the UN Water Conference. We must increase capacity development. We must strengthen collaboration on an international level, and we must empower women, young stakeholders, and all those who are underrepresented. These commitments are essential to building the foundation for future generations to innovate and create lasting change in sustainable water management. Thank you all so much for your time. Gaetano, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Lindsay and Karine, for these very inspiring words, at least for me. So we are reaching the end of this session. And now we have come to a very important part of the session. Actually, I hope you still have some energy to listen to the story we're going to tell you now. And I think, David, I give the floor to you for this extremely important, last but not least part of the session.
Yeah, thank you very much, Gaetano. And thank you all for staying here. Thank you, Karine and Lindsay, for those insightful words, and definitely ignited some passion here for us. So if we go to the last slide of the day, it should be hopefully a QR code. Here we go. So this QR code is quite important because it's going to ignite, as Lindsay said, the initiative of creating a community for young, old, experienced professionals in the water sector. So even you, Richard, can come and join. The whole purpose behind this community that we're creating on LinkedIn is exactly that. We saw a gap that existed in bringing these professionals together. Yes, organizations and platforms exist for organizations, companies to come together, but not at a professional level. And this is exactly where we're wanting that to happen in terms of international cooperation. I, as a company director, have oftentimes very difficult job in trying to find who is working at a particular local level in a particular country. We can do that through this group. So today is the official launch of this LinkedIn group. Share it amongst your own networks and use it and make sure that you are driving the international cooperation within your own communities, and that we can make a better, fair and just community as we move forward. So with that, hand over to Dirk to close off this session and to wrap up for us. So thank you, Dirk.
Okay. Thank you. Well, first of all, I want to congratulate you all, because you are the diehards of Water Innovation Europe 2023. And the good news is you're not alone, because you've been joined by 700 people, at least 700 people online over the different media channels that we have used to broadcast, to broad stream this event. We've heard a lot about semantics, yeah? But I think one thing was clear: water-oriented living labs must be a means to a purpose, yeah? A means to a purpose that is also context specific, yeah? I think that's really the message that I took from today. And now before I would say formally concluding, and I will hurry up, because according to my watch, David, your mom is now somewhere between 23:30, 1:30 in the morning. Where is she? Perth, Canberra? Perth. Okay, that's good. We still have some time until midnight. Yeah, no, we'll do it quick. But before we go there, and to be honest, as we are now with a little group, and as you are the diehards of Water Innovation Europe, those who still have some energy and are not in a hurry to go, I would like to invite you all to come up to the 4th floor. Yeah, take the elevator to the 4th floor, where we have our Water Europe offices. We have a good fridge with a lot of good beer in there. So if you're up for it, you're welcome to join us there. Yeah, but in between me and the beer, I'd like to introduce my colleague. Well, you've met him already a few times during these few days, Andrea Rubini. Andrea leads within Water Europe the program on Water-Oriented Living Labs, and also in that sense the Pillar D in the Water for All partnership. And I would like to give Andrea a very quick reflection on what he heard from the perspective of Water-Oriented Living Labs and the Water for All partnership.
Thank you.
Very quick, Andrea.
Thank you so much, and with pleasure. Because today we really had, a lot of insights, from senior, junior, who is in the middle of the career of the water sector. And yes, a living lab is a tool. And why we use, the terminology water-oriented living lab? Because it's a tool, it's an instrument that serves us to achieve something that's important, is a systemic, transformative change of our society for a water smart society. That's, it's the magic that's here. And of course, a water-oriented living lab and a living lab is for sure something that has in its own nature a long-term sustainability approach. Because we need long-term sustainability, we need inclusiveness, we need good governance. And all this inclusiveness and good governance can drive how to address the challenges, how to find the investment that are necessary to achieve a water smart society. This is just a reflection for today. And as I said, on the day one of Water Innovation Europe 2023, you got a small card with you. It is a plastic card. It is not a credit card. It will not pay you anything, at the restaurant or somewhere else. And the beers upstairs are for free, of course. But, there is an important message there. You find water sustainability, water security, water resilience. And this is a water smart society. This is what we want to achieve through the Water Oriented Living Labs. So thank you so much once again. I pass the last word to Duke for the really final words. Thank you.